say religious division is sinful in the eyes of God. In fact, God hates division. He always hated division. He hates division in the home. He hates divorce, Malachi chapter 2. He hates division in the church, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. Jesus said, let us all be one. All one. Well, how are we going to do that? How can we be one when you're a Methodist and somebody else is a Baptist, somebody else is a Presbyterian? We're not calling names to be mean. We're simply trying to awake people and say, look, why don't we just agree to drop these man-made religious titles? Sir, for one example, let me show you something, if you don't mind, if you have a moment. Let me show you one doctrine that the Methodists teach that is not consistent with the Bible. For example, the Methodist sprinkle. Were you sprinkled, sir?
No, I was baptized, and I want to be baptized.
Okay, and that's the right mode, we agree. But I'm saying the Methodist practices sprinkling, do they not?
Yes, yes.
Okay. When John the Baptizer was preaching in John chapter 3, verse 23, he preached where there was much water. And the reason he did that is because his baptism included immersion. The very word baptism in the correct definition is immersion. And you'll remember, Steve, when Jesus was baptized in Matthew chapter 3, the Bible says he went straightway, came up straightway out of the water. How can a man come up out of a sprinkle? Romans 6:3, baptism reenacts the death of our Lord. Our death, the Lord's death, well, he was not sprinkled in death. He was completely engulfed in death and buried in the tomb and so forth.
But by the religions being different, you know, people going to do things different.
Sir, they do things different, but I'm saying...
And they might not be right, but when all this started, and naturally people were going to do things different.
Okay.
And I believe we shouldn't have all of it.
Okay, sir, and I believe you're a good and honest heart, and this is a wonderful call, and this is exactly why we're on the TV tonight. Here's what we're saying. If we could show you what the Bible says about baptism and other subjects as well, and prove it with the Bible, would you agree to accept it?
To a certain degree, yeah.
Okay. Do you agree that all of God's Scripture is inspired and from God? 2 Timothy 3:16.
Yes.
Do you believe that Jesus said, he that loveth me keepeth his commandments? John 14:15.
Oh, yeah.
So if it's a commandment of God and the Bible is true, then why are we talking about certain degree? Why wouldn't we just say we would accept it if the Bible teaches it?
Well, I would look into it. Most of us not just going to change overnight.
And we don't expect...
At the same time,
that's right.
I'm an open-minded person,
right.
And I would look into it.
But I'm saying if after a while, after you searched it, Acts 17:11, they searched the Scriptures, if you saw that it was so, and it was nothing but Bible, would you be willing to accept it?
It's a possibility I would accept it.
Sir, we're very thankful for this call, and we hope the community is going to heat up the lines tonight.
Okay.
Because the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, the Presbyterian Church, what the inconsistencies they have are not the fact that they're all people that are dishonest. There are honest and good people in all of those religions. The inconsistencies are those things that are human traditions, Matthew 15:7, that are driving wedges in religion. And we're thankful that you called.
Okay, thank you.
And listen, we want to put you on hold, and we want to get your name and your number, and we want to send you something free of charge. We don't want money. We want to send you something, and we want to get your name and address and pray for you and be in contact with you, sir. Please hold.
Okay.
Line 3 is not holding. There it goes. I'm sorry. You're on live. What does the Bible say?
Yeah, saying, what did the Bible say?
Yes, sir.
Well, the Bible written in Hebrew.
Well, the Bible was written actually in 3 languages originally. Most of the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. Part of it was written in Aramaic, which was a sister language to the Hebrew language. And the New Testament was written in the Greek language. And we use today what is called a translation. Of course, I have an English translation of the Bible. But to answer your question, yes, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew.
Well, if you don't have the Hebrew Bible and the Bible been translated, you could be wrong too, couldn't you?
Well, that all depends on whether the translation is correct or not. We certainly believe that we have the Word of God today in the English language. Now, keep in mind that when God originally began to have the gospel to be preached by the apostles, that He knew that translations would be needed. That's why, Brand, He endowed the apostles to be able to speak miraculously in tongues.
Yeah,
Could-
but my point being, anything been translated, if any word has been changed, I don't see how you gonna say what the Bible says.
Well,
in other words,
Sir, let me ask you a question. If you don't, what church do you go to, sir?
well, now that ain't got nothing to do with the question I asked you.
No, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with it, but I'll tie it in a moment. We'll answer the question, and we will be specific. I'm just asking you what church you're in, please.
Now, I ain't tired with no church. My point is,
Okay.
how you gonna say what the Bible say when you don't have the reading of the Bible?
Here's how. Basically, God, the Bible itself, 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, makes a claim for inspiration itself. There are internal and external marks that prove the Bible is inspired. There is no way under heaven that anybody has been able to disprove the Bible. That's one reason. Nobody has ever been able to disprove the Bible.
All right. Would I be wrong if I say I didn't believe that Bible you got? Would I be wrong?
Well, sir, if you don't believe in the Word of God, yes, you're wrong.
No, I asked you about the translation. In other words, I don't believe in it. If the Bible has been translated, and something been changed in it, I don't believe what you said when you said what the Bible could be.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we can't give. What you're basically doing is trying to put a cloud of doubt around biblical inspiration. And Steve, a lot of people do
You
that.
ain't got to read the Bible. It was written in Hebrew, and if
Sir,
something changed in
but
it,
the Bible teaches us that God would preserve His word. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 8, the flowers wither away, the grass fadeth, but the word of our Lord abideth forever. Do you think God would be just, Steve, if He says that I'm going to hold you accountable in the day of judgment to the words of Jesus, John 12:48, and then yet those words are not accessible by the human race?
Yeah. And also, I would ask the caller this particular question. What passage specifically do you have in mind that is not translated correctly?
well, I mean, hey, that's what I'm asking you. In other words, if like I said, if something been changed in it, I think I got a point when I say I don't believe what you say in that particular book you got there.
All right, let's suppose then that I believe that the entire English translation of the New Testament and the Old Testament is correct. Now, let's suppose that I make that statement. Now, you challenge it. What passage do you have in mind?
That's what you say. That's what you say. That's what you say you believe in that.
That's right, but now you're questioning what I say.
But I'm saying it. Do I have a point when I said it was written in...
No, you don't have a point.
Well, now, how do you have a point if you don't know how the Hebrew book was written?
Well, I do know the Hebrew. I know the Greek. I've had both in both.
Is any word changed in it?
No, it's translated correctly.
No, I believe... Hey, you better go back and check it.
All right, what passage do you have in mind?
You better go back and check it again.
We're going to put this caller on hold, Steve, because here's this reason. I want to explain this to the audience. This guy's basically made a charge, and I'll guarantee you, Steve, people put a cloud of doubt around inspiration. Why do they do it? Because we're saying the churches of Christ, we speak where the Bible speaks. If they can get the hearers to think that this book is not from God, then what we speak from the Bible then is not authoritative.
And notice this. Yes, we agree, obviously, that we're reading from a translation. But now, why wouldn't a caller give me an example pertaining to a specific verse?
When you said that it was translated correctly, he said it wasn't. When you asked for the proof, he wouldn't give it. That's dishonesty at its best and proof of right here in Martinsville. The first caller's honest, the second caller calls in, and I'm saying, partly not telling the truth, at least in my opinion, because he wouldn't give the answer. If he knows why won't he give it to us?
Listen, we have the Bible.
Thanks for being with us tonight. We're on What Does the Bible Say? And as you can see, we have a different format tonight. And so we want you to recognize that our broadcast is very versatile. We have debates on What Does the Bible Say? We have tent meetings that we publish on What Does the Bible Say? We are now doing interviews with individuals called Candid Christian. And that's what we're going to be doing tonight. What's some of the other things that we were praised for here the other day?
Someone who's on YouTube viewer, he said 2-week tent meetings, weekly broadcasts, weekly door knocking, articles. I don't know that he said for you, world missions. Maybe he didn't know you went overseas.
Oh.
But the weekly door knocking, 2-week tent meetings, debates, weekly television, preaching, Bible class, daytime TV, Bible class. Whoever that person is had it all itemized.
Yeah.
And then he said, upcoming interview with Rubel Shelly. His exact quote was, he said, "You say what you want to about Johnny and Caleb, but they are diversified."
So we hope that you'll enjoy this format tonight. It's going to be informative from the standpoint of we're handling things inside the Church of Christ, and I don't mean inside of a building, but this is similar to you getting to see the Southern Baptist Convention flap, if you want to call it that, where they're fighting it out, and it's like in-house. And some people say, well, y'all are doing stuff that we don't. We actually have posts on our videos lately that say, this is Church of Christ stuff, and so we don't know what y'all are doing. Would y'all get back to the things that all of us know? Well, we're letting you see the inside of what takes place with us, just like the Southern Baptist Convention, just like you're seeing with the Methodists. And so this is actually a prelude. Tomorrow night will be the full interview, almost 2 hours long.
Yes.
Took place in February
Right.
of this year. And so it's going to play in its entirety tomorrow night. And so we're giving everybody a heads up throughout the United States that's associated with the Church of Christ, because a lot of them are going to wonder, why are y'all doing this? And then we're also going to talk about why it is the case that we really think that we have the right to do it, and I don't think anybody else is going to even try to cover these kinds of things. We've seen a couple of Christian discussions. A young fellow named Waylon.
Right.
And so they were all friendly.
Yes, and so they will find Waylon Deaver interviewed Thomas Warren, and anybody who doesn't know, Thomas Warren was very good friends with Roy Deaver. Waylon is Roy's grandson, so there was not going to be any tension there. And, I have a couple people in mind who I think they might be tense. Interviewing Rubel Shelly was not tense, and
It would be for them.
I think
Other
so.
people.
And so right away, like if we could have our first bit of audio. So we're introducing, this is what it would look like. He and I just sit down at a table. And what we're really wanting to do tonight, this was our first bit of audio.
Difference. And I'll just say this and then I'll go on. There is error and there's fatal error. I'll give you an example. Revelation chapter 20 and 21, we could get at a good discussion, particularly on chapter 21. Is that speaking about the church or is that speaking about heaven? Now, that's an opinion issue. I can tell you that. I know brethren say, that's heaven. Others say, no, it's not heaven, it's the church. And then maybe someone comes along and says, well, maybe it's the church with overtones of heaven. Does it matter? I mean, it does. They're both not right, unless it's the overtones and involves both. But you could also go to maybe Acts 2:38. And someone says, well, I believe it's the miraculous, which I happen to believe. Another brother says, well, I believe it's all that God would bring, including the miraculous, but it also involves salvation as well. I mean, those are distinctions, but do we need to divide the church over that? Certainly not. And so fellowship determined, I would say this, as I go into my third and final point, which we'll spend most of our time on, fellowship denied, I want to say this, brethren. Ephesians 4:32. Ephesians 4:31 and 32 is just as much a part of the Bible as Acts 2:38. Ephesians 4:31 and 32. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. Sometimes this is even harder, because I can tell you, brethren, when I come across false teachers like Cato and Shelly and these guys, I'm like the little girl across the street. I sometimes want to rip their head off and dip it in mustard and eat it. But I have to work with them in a certain way to try to make sure that I...
Now, how did I even think that I had, like you said a minute ago, how do you think you have the right to go do it? Well, Jason Rollo said we need to do it. Right after he gets done saying, when I think about Rubel Shelly, I'd like to bite his head off and eat it with mustard. No, I'm not thinking about any of these people that way at all. We're talking to brothers in Christ. I'm not thinking about ripping people's heads off, biting their heads off. But if you see the headline up there, Jason Rollo said we need to do it. So I did it. I went and I talked to Rubel Shelly, which is what he said we need to do. And like you just said a moment ago, no, I don't think anybody, that's just a phrase and a line that got put out there. But nobody is thinking about Yeah, I'm driving through Nashville. I'm going to stop, which is what I did. I'm driving through Nashville. I just been out raising funds in December. I'm finally getting to come home after the whole month being out on the road. I did. I had my wife and my baby, which I didn't have for the first half of the month. And on the way back, I tell her, I'm going to stop in, ask this secretary, does Rubel Shelly keep an office? And I'm going to ask him if he'll have an interview. And he says yes. So I'm doing what was suggested to be done.
Well, this, just as to give people a setup of what actually that was that Caleb played, that was a well-known lectureship in Portland, Texas. It's called the Gulf Coast Lectures. It was in 2016, and we had just been to that lectureship in 2015, and I had done a full hour on fellowship, called names of individuals, and pretty much set that congregation on their ear. From the standpoint of the people that we were talking about for fellowship were in the audience, many of them. School of Preaching from Florida, the director, Brian Kenyon, was in the audience. People from the Southwest School of Preaching in Austin, Texas, relatives were in the audience. And so the next year they have Jason Rollo to talk on full out, a whole lectureship on fellowship, and Jason Rollo has the keynote lesson, and that's all he said.
Right.
He just basically said, I'm not going to have fellowship with them. I'm going to tear his head off and put mustard on it and he'd eat it.
And at that time frame, there would really have been no sense where he was ever going to be in a room with Rubel Shelly. It looks a lot different right now, but just a handful of years ago, like him saying that, I'm not going to fellowship these people, he was never going to be in the room with him.
Well, the year before, in 2014, we stopped on our way to Portland. Every year we would go to Gulf Coast Lectures. We stopped on our way in San Marcos. And we stopped at an event that we would not be welcome at necessarily. We went in, there were 5 preaching schools. You remember that?
Yeah.
They were five preaching schools that were actually represented there. We ended up talking to the director of one of the preaching schools. We talked to Wayne Jones' father, David Jones, who is now a teacher in another school of preaching in Elizabethton, Tennessee. And, you know, he caused a big fuss, just basically telling one of the elders that don't talk to him. He wrote the radical handbook on whatever. And so we're basically saying, no, we were there to follow up on what people say we ought to do. Have you talked to somebody at the Southwest School of Preaching? Yes. Have you talked to somebody at San Marcos before you say that they're having false teachers? We're here to check it out. And we don't get any time for that, do we?
Yeah, you were even talking to Wes McAdams, which,
Right.
again, right now, they're not really making enough noise about Wes McAdams, but a couple people have their eye on him. That, again, is a moment where you talk directly to Wes McAdams and you said, Wes, you're up in ACU. Are you really going along with Royce Money? And the way I remember it was he was just kind of like him hawing. But even then, Mike Bonner is really coming in because
who's now in a preaching school in Texas School of Preaching.
And he's really, at that moment, this is my friend Wes. I'm not going to let you treat him this way, but you said the words, Royce Money? Oh, no. Mike Bonner said, oh, no, we're not doing that. So we are there, and to be honest.
We were there to talk to Jay Lockhart also.
Yes.
Which is a board member for Freed Hardeman. So are we not doing high level?
Right. And, it's tough. If y'all want to know, I didn't know everybody in that room. Dan Cates was there. There's going to be a handful of people that I didn't know. And, your statement to me as we were walking around was, you said you could try to smile. There's a lot of people who already don't like you in here. And it wasn't that pleasant.
Yeah.
It's like someone says, you need to go see him. Well, I'm not getting a warm welcome.
Yeah.
But I'm going to try.
But one note is everybody knew about what does the Bible say.
Yeah.
The young preacher students were saying, hey, guys, J.J. Hendricks, which would be the son-in-law of the director of the Brown Trail School of Preaching, we had good rapport with several individuals unless they had a reason to be upset. And so that's our MO. And these guys are talking about the fact that we're caustic and too rough and all this kind of stuff, a radical handbook on fellowship, and yet this is the kind of way, as we opened up, this is the way the Texas School of Preaching co-director talks about an individual who has a soul and they don't know a thing about. That's one of the reasons you did that interview, right?
Yes.
They have no clue.
They have no clue the story behind what Rubel Shelly was in the 70s, how the 80s even played out. And when you basically start saying, well, how is that we're even deciding our marching pattern? I would say a bunch of people have no clue what their marching pattern is right now. And so I had a very specific reason. I did want to add, too, to those guys' credit. Like when you said people would say that we're caustic and whatnot when we come in. Two parties had to apologize to you before we left Focal Point. And that's to their credit.
Right.
But I'm saying you didn't have to. Like you
Right.
go in, you're just talking to them.
Now, I remember the individual that said the Radical Handbook. Did somebody else?
Yeah, Mike Bonner came out to the parking lot and
Yeah,
he apologized.
that's right. That's
so both parties apologized, and that's to their credit.
Absolutely.
I'm saying that's Christian behavior. Like someone said, well, they shouldn't have blown up. What's Christian behavior that they apologize?
Yeah.
So I don't want to like keep that from them, but I want to add this note. Like someone says, well, why are y'all doing like a sit down for the interview? Why don't you just play the interview? So in the last several years, Dad has given this book out a ton. And it's a history book. It's a biography. And even I said this because I read it before I went to preaching school, and we would have conversation about it. And I read it, and then once he knew that I had read it, his question to me, you know, obviously he said, what did you think about it? And then I told him, I said, well, I don't know why you had me read this. And then we started finding out a couple other people that we gave the book to, they said, I don't know why you had me read this. And so what we ended up having to do was we had to put with the book a very short memo to go with it so they could understand what you're looking for. And this is all the history of 1906. Hall Lowry Calhoun was a president at Freed Hardeman. He was taught by David Lipscomb and James A. Harding, and also very connected to J.W. McGarvey. And so he's a key player when all the instrumental music discussions started coming in. And so people would read it and they'd say, well, a lot of people read it and say, I didn't even like him. Like, I don't know why you gave me that book.
One guy said, I said, that you remind me of him for some reason. I don't remember what it was, but he said, that's kind of an insult.
Yeah.
Well, the guy ends up being a hero towards the end.
And so people didn't recognize that we were saying, if you'll study how this went, you'll see a lot of, like, exchanging of favors. Hey, if you start back in our position, we'll offer you a faculty position. And it's like, that stuff happens now in backroom meetings. And it doesn't have to be a faculty position at school, but it's like, you know, you start making some noise on this, a lot of your meetings are going to get canceled. So,
And this was the catalyst for the split that really propelled the Christian church onto the scene as a separate entity and ended up getting them in a census in 1906 that they were alone. You know, they were independent Christian church then, and then the Church of Christ was listed. And so for some of you around here, you don't even know the beginnings of the Christian church. They don't know they know that we have some kind of close relationship in the past because the old people still remember.
In Virginia, North Carolina, the Christian church and the Disciples of Christ, which didn't come till the 60s, the Christian church massively, historically in the 1800s and the 1906 split, there was only 450-something members of the Church of Christ in Virginia, North Carolina put together in 1906. You look at that census, massively outnumbered. So when we start having these conversations, what you just said, they don't know a lot of the history, but they are here. There's a lot of them, they don't know the history. And so that's another point of why I went to talk to Rubel. So if we say, we want to give like a short memo, we're giving you the book. Well, what am I supposed to get out of the book? When you watch the interview, my number one, like I want to get this out in the front as much as I can. I read his book, and I've read a number of his books, but I read his book, I Just Want to Be a Christian, which came out in 1984. But I'm also reading Ira Rice's paper called Contending for the Faith, and I'm also reading Rule Lemon's paper, Firm Foundation. I'm reading Contending for the Faith, Firm Foundation, Restoration Review, Spiritual Sword. I'm reading all these people talk about Rubel in the 1980s, which makes me then start looking at him in the 70s. None of this is making sense to me. And as I just keep watching, keep reading, and I'm digging deeper and deeper, I notice something, and so I say this. And I'm going to play the video, just a very snippet of me talking to Rubel Shelly. Front end, if I can get this out on the front end, I did this interview for young preachers. Now, you're going to see the interview, and you're going to have multiple moments like this. Like if I could just give you your taste buds.
No, it was Ira Rice.
Get out of town.
It was Ira Rice.
You're telling me stuff that
Yeah.
I have never known.
Ira Rice, you were, at that little bit of an insult he put in there. He said, I had 5 choices and Rubel Shelly was my 6th. But you were in there. And I think...
So, the interesting thing about interviewing him was he had not kept up with what people said about him and what the goings-on were. So I got to have a lot of conversation with him where he says, no, I didn't know these things. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. But this is my big point. If I can slide over to, this is about 1 hour and 13 in. This was my big, absolute why I wanted to talk to him.
I really think that you like to talk about yourself. And I don't. I
don't.
These things I'm trying to build about. This is what I want to say, Rubel. In the 70s, you were the superstar. And I heard you a moment ago say that you weren't trying to be. The way that anybody reads the stories, if they get the papers out, you were the superstar. And when you said blackball, I want young guys to know and be ready for it. If they try to climb this ladder, if that's what they're shooting for, it can be ripped out from underneath them so quickly. And I think, Rubel, that that's what they did to you.
Well, it's not about me.
But you're a
it's
person.
not about you and some young preacher who hears this and who, on whatever topic, has come to a conclusion that, but if I say that, I'll be fired. Judiciously, lovingly, kindly, and in the right place. Don't go spoiling for a fight. But if you're asked your conviction about it, speak your conviction. Live with integrity. And the worst thing in the world is not to lose a job.
That's it.
Okay, so my reason, it's the same, but I get to say it this way. This guy had basically been preaching about 20 years at this time frame. And not when Caleb was interviewing.
1984.
1984. And those of you who want to rip his head off and eat it with mustard, I'm saying that you could not hold a candle ever. And I doubt very seriously that you will ever achieve what he did in 20 years in your entire life. When Caleb said he was a superstar, this guy was being used all over the place. Caleb's going to get into the different accomplishments that he had, and they're things that you would only dream about being called upon, tapped to get to do. And this is the thing that the young preachers need to know. This gentleman didn't just jump off and go off into liberalism, without being ever involved with a career. And what he left behind, I'm saying, just would make your mouth water, that you would even get to do minuscule things that he did. And so we're talking about 1984, Rubel Shelly, and back. We're not in any way promoting Rubel Shelly and the different decisions that he's made forward from there. But we are saying that the interview is going to detail how you can actually get into those things and how many people crucified him for the things that are going on today in our own camp, if we can say it that way.
I think right now you say, well, I don't like Rubel Shelly. And it's like, you don't know Rubel Shelly. And someone says, well, my teachers told me. Your teachers don't know about Rubel Shelly. My teachers talked about Rubel Shelly, and they gave a wildly inaccurate description of him. And I just had people, and this is why I said, young guys, I don't let anybody talk trash about you. I don't take single entity stories. Well, let me tell you about so-and-so. No, I don't do that with y'all. I don't let people talk to me about that. And I'm saying one in particular. Now, he has died. But I had a person call me about Melvin Sapp. He said, Melvin Sapp teaches XYZ on marriage and divorce. And I knew it was wrong. And I said, hold on, I got to call you right back. I called Melvin Sapp. And I said, I got this man on the phone. He's telling me you teach marriage, divorce, remarriage. Melvin Sapp said, give me his phone number. I gave it to him. I called the dude back. I said, Melvin's about to call you. Wait. No, I'm not doing that. But that is what people have done to Rubel Shelly. And you just don't get an accurate picture. But my thing about it, too, the young guys, for him to be the superstar that he was, massive appreciation that they had for him in the 70s and in the early 80s. They did not give him a fair hearing. And I'm saying that if he could be at the absolute top of his game and appreciated by everybody, and they do him the way that they did, they will absolutely do it to you. And so I'm not asking anybody to be beholden to me. And I have told people on the phone, I don't want to manage you. And there's some things that they've even said, you don't even need to be telling me this. I'm in a local work, you're in a local, I don't even need to be hearing some of that. But what I believe that the schools, the directors, the preachers who are on the meeting circuits, Down here in the blue, this is why I did it. Galatians 2:6, this is what Paul said. Those who, excuse me, seem to be somewhat whatsoever they were, it maketh no matter to me. God accepts no man's persons. For they seem to be somewhat in conference, added nothing to me. And so right now in the brotherhood, we certainly have scribes, and we have doctors, and we have these bishops and cardinals. And I think that they watch for these young guys to come along, and all they want to do is manage you. They want to use you. They want to use you to propel their ministry. And I'm saying, you got a good brain, you're a good thinker, they're going to punish you for that. They don't want you thinking. They want you listening. And they're always going to be telling you stuff like, well, I think that we know better on this, and if you had talked to us about it, we could have coached you. What he just said, Rubel did not need coaching in the 1980s. He was beyond the people who would have been trying to manage him. And I'm saying to you, young guys, you're 20, you're 30, look, go beyond me. Go beyond my dad. Go beyond all the schools. The biggest thing in the world is not to get on a lectureship. If you're thinking about getting on a lectureship, that is so small thinking. Why do you not want to talk to people outside the body of Christ? And also, you're just going to get on a lectureship that's in one of the smallest towns in the western corner of Tennessee. Such small thinking. And he rose above that thinking, and they attempted to beat him down for it. So I really, and I say it this way too, and I've said this, we talk about it. I said it on the broadcast the other day. I think a lot of people think that I'm hard because they just say, well, Caleb will always have a parachute in his dad.
So let me just interject this. We were talking about having a segment where we talked about people that have been with us. How come you knew you could actually call Melvin Sapp up? There's a picture we forgot.
Yeah.
Melvin Sapp, been here, basically came, helped us in a tent meeting, brought his entire school. He was a director of a school as well. And rubbed shoulders with Caleb. All of these individuals that we're going to be talking about today. People tell us all the time, you can't tell us anything. You don't even know us. That's the problem y'all are having with us.
Yeah.
You have no idea the individuals that have come through here, mixed and mingled with us, and we have a one-on-one relationship where you can call up Melvin Sapp and say, Melvin, these guys are talking about you. And that's the thing that people do appreciate about us, because we go to these different places. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we went to actually talk to Jay Lockhart, who everybody was using, who was all up in the farthest left leaning, as far as Rubel Shelly ever was. He was in the same boat, and he's not even in play anymore. And a lot of it had to do with, other individuals say, y'all got him off of the Bear Valley Master's program.
Yeah.
And so.
And also, like with that statement, someone says, is that what you're shooting for? No. I would like for people just to repent. Like, the idea is never to just go out and have people fired, lose funds. I would much rather have a fellow participant in spreading the gospel. But a lot of what they're doing right now is just what you said, spreading a ministry, whatever their label is, their logo.
Well, even with him, later on, maybe the next year, we were trying to talk to him because he had some bad things happen to him in his own life. And as I tried to reach him, my own friends were just turning on me, particularly one woman. She said, no way I'm going to let you have an entrance into Jay Lockhart. You don't care anything about him.
And someone says you're trying to talk to Jay Lockhart. We drove from Virginia to Marshall, Texas.
Right.
Like in ridiculous amount of time.
30-something hours and back.
Down and back.
Right.
Boom. And,
And stopped on the way and talked to Stephen Ford from Memphis, one of your classmates, in order to talk to him about the fellowship issue, as busy as we were.
Right. In his office.
Right.
And so I will.
So how did we get an interest into that? That just goes to show we get to talk to these individuals that we're talking about now. And is there a place where I tell about Jason Rollo, the fact that we just had an opportunity to talk to him and he would not? We were in town 3 or 4 days at different times.
So I do want to say this too, again, to Stephen Ford's credit. He let us come in.
Right.
Let us come in, sit down. Hey, I like that. We took a chance, stopped by, want to talk. He says, yes, come in, we sit down. He didn't really do too much with what we were presenting. Kind of the classic thing of the less I know, the better off I am. But, we drive through, headed to Marshall, Texas, and he's in Arkansas. Stephen Ford has been a fairly regular person that Collinsville Church of Christ gets to do their meetings.
Came here to try to Well, I don't know that he ever saw you. He said he came by the building like 12 o'clock at night.
That's right. He came by and he said he took a picture of the 823 Starling Avenue. You know, 823, so he got a picture of that. But, you know, we come and we see him. He comes here, and it's just with the congregation that takes in everybody we withdraw from. And so I don't feel like it's been very reciprocal to come back in our way. So now, am I, like, before we move off of this one, this was my big thing. When you watch the 2 hours of me sitting down with Rubel Shelly, I actually read his book, and I do want to say this too. I don't just read his book. I read Curtis Cates writing up his book. I told Wesley Simons on the phone Monday. Wesley called me. He was upset. And I told Wesley, he said, who was your best teacher at Memphis? I said, Curtis Cates. We didn't have him very much because he was so sick. Yeah, but when I read Curtis Cates' write-up of Rubel Shelly's, I would say, second big book, it's not great. Curtis could not possibly disagree with Rubel Shelly saying you can't just go along with everything the church hands you. Curtis believes in double checking.
Yeah.
And that's what he was saying. It's like, you can't just take a tradition handed down to you. Well, what's wrong with asking questions? And so if you got elders in place, they're going to convince the mouths of the gainsayers, so what's the problem? So am I wrong on that? Young preachers, I mean, obviously you have more friends who have been moved around. Like you have just from the late 80s till now, have you not been watching just your friends play?
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes I have to talk about different things that they're doing, but it's like my heart goes out to these guys. And I haven't been moved around. Rather than move around, I'd just soon split the congregation, be fired, whatever it takes. And the school blackballed me because of that, because a lot of times you're actually going to...
You split a Memphis church.
Right. And so... I'm not going to put up with that kind of stuff, but I hate it for them because I know exactly how they feel. And then you were in school when Donnie Vick came back from being fired, and they're like, congratulations and whatever. I just don't take that being fired.
No.
It's like, you should have, why not save that church for us? And they're going to send another preacher over to the same church.
Donnie gets fired up in like the Roanoke, Lynchburg area. They're just going to send another person from the school over there.
Actually, it was in the Manassas area. He ends up landing in Lynchburg later.
So I had a acquaintance of mine. I don't have a problem calling him a friend. I don't know if he'd call me a friend. But he was in the Greenville, Texas area. And he's telling me, we're sitting down, we're talking. And he says, I am leaving the congregation. Like, he's not getting fired. He's leaving. He's not making a stink on the way out either. And he's saying to me, I can't raise my family under this type of an eldership. And I asked him, I said, will you say anything? And he said, I just think it's better if I move on. Young guy, he's my age. And I said, did the school get you that job? And he said, well, they helped me. And I said, right. And I said, the school's probably going to send somebody right behind you, aren't they? And he goes, probably. And I said, and how are you helping him? He's going to come into that ungodly eldership that you're walking out on and have no clue. Don't say that you're a friend to the guy coming behind you.
Well, that's exactly what happened in the congregation that I ended up splitting. The preacher in front of me left. Didn't say a word. He could have saved me a lot of heartache. He could have moved me way ahead in being able to help those brethren. And he went on to, he actually went on to a good Memphis church in Olive Branch. And 2 years later, 2.5 years later, we're having split. He could have, he could have helped me, but he wasn't going to do that because he would have been hurt in Olive Branch. How dare you talk about a church that's going to send a Memphis guy, which was me. And so that's the kind of stuff we're talking about, and that's the kind of stuff that Caleb was trying to actually get from Rubel Shelly. Can we help some of these guys?
Yeah, and I think that you can. It basically just takes what he just said. I'm not going to just like do the game where I get fired and go crawling back to the school. Well, they don't like it, but Rubel Shelly wasn't doing that either. And that's their problem is a lot of you guys stay bowed down to your school and you don't get to excel. Well, he rose above their school and they tried to beat him down for it. And you don't need what they're offering. You're going to school and people are saying we need to trust God.
Now, if a lot of people listen to this, and then I'm just hearing this my own self, if you're listening to this, would you stop and think why a whole just humongous group of a brotherhood just decided to crucify this one guy? What? Why would everybody? Who is Rubel Shelly? It makes it sound like he is. Was somebody huge. Why would everybody load up and seek to destroy him? And still today, Jason Rollo doesn't even know the history, but yet he's saying, Rubel Shelly, I like to rip his head off and eat it with mustard. Why? Why is he such a villain? He was a powerful, powerful individual.
And I think most people, they're not reading his stuff, and I think there's a handful of, he's written over 20 books. He has a book on Genesis, has a book on the Ten Commandments, 1st and 2nd Peter, James, 1 Corinthians, Luke, Mark, Acts, Revelation, just a book, general book on ethics. And it's like, you could read, and a book on preaching, if I didn't say that, homiletics and hermeneutics. They're not going to look at that stuff.
No.
Book on James. And I do want to say this too, a thing about, and his debates, I don't see a lot of young guys getting debates, and I also don't know a lot of people who would be in your age group or a little bit younger that they got any debates. Mm-hmm. I do want to say, he's got one book that sold over 100,000 copies. It's called Young People and Their Lord.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like...
Still out there.
Right. Who has done that that's basically not even taking him on, they're just in some auditorium.
And why is that book, why is it the case that book sold? He was a superstar with the young people.
Right.
I'm from Texas, northeast Texas, about 60 miles west of Texarkana, between Texarkana and Dallas. My mother-in-law remembers Rubel Shelly coming there, and the young people, we're talking about 70s, y'all. Sexual revolution, God is dead in the 60s, and you've got this young, clean-cut guy that comes through, and all of the young people, he's encouraging them to go to school, to a school where you can actually get some training back in the day.
Right.
That's why his book was so popular, is he was their age and he was in there with them.
And another thing about this is just a note about his books. I had a friend of mine, and they said, what in your mind makes a good book? And I said, I can tell very fast if it's going to be good or not. And I do have to say this one thing about Rubel's books is consistently they're short. And he wrote them to be short because he wanted them to be read. He wanted them to be read so that he could help people. There are a lot of guys who are writing books just so they can write a big, fat book where they repeat themselves 3 different times. Like, I've read a number of books where I said I read the same thing 3 times.
Yeah.
He wrote them short. He wrote them to the point because he actually had an idea of, I want to help people with this rather than I just want to have my name on something. So, and what are we saying here too? Don't just be out here taking people's say-so, talking trash. Like, I really have to say that if someone's watching this and they were saying, it's pretty unbelievable that they're saying don't just trust the say-so on Rubel Shelly. Well, I think that ought to give you confidence I do that for you. Don't just trust the say-so on whoever.
And very big name, Caleb's going to actually present this, and you would see it. You probably might not present all this because it's in the interview. You're going to want to see the interview to see the tremendous amount of clout that he had as a result of these older men putting their confidence in him and helping him to move along. And they weren't doing this politically. He was doing them a favor by being involved with them. When you said it's a short book, you see this book. This is his book, I Just Want to Be a Christian. Listen, y'all, this book, even though you're seeing it, it looks pretty thick. It's basically 100 pages of what he writes, and the rest of it is him documenting how many other people were saying the exact same thing, including people that a lot of these people that were jumping on him reverenced, they appreciated, had high regard for, and would not they're not to this day going to be able to refute, that what Rubel Shelly was saying in its basic form, even though we're not in any way saying that we give him approval today.
No.
That we would say for you that we want you to be in fellowship with Rubel Shelly, that we appreciate what he's done further. We're talking about you finding out what an individual that you likely would hate. Jason Rollo does not have a clue what he is saying. And would you say this too, Caleb? How much would God want Rubel Shelly back?
Just a ton.
It's just the idea of losing somebody of that magnitude. And so what was your role in it? That's exactly why you went, was it not? Is to try to reach out, and this individual has intrigued you. Now, I was overseas when a lot of this was going on. Basically I was in school in '86, and then by the end of the decade, I was into the Marshall Islands, and so this book here took place while I was gone. So, I'm kind of in the dark too with 1992. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very intrigued once I began to realize just how many accomplishments and the integrity that 1984 and back Rubel Shelly actually had, and that cost him pretty much everything at that juncture. So.
Yeah, I know. And then there's some more. I have to say it that way too. Like if you're hearing this and you say, I never really thought that I'd be hearing this, and I'd say, well, that ought to give you confidence that we would do it for you. We'd take up for you. I mean, if it's unfounded, if it's just absolutely wrong. But then the way that you said that too, all these people who are, like Jason Rollo, speaking unintelligently about Rubel Shelly, that makes me say they would speak unintelligently about you. Like once it starts coming down, trickling down the party line, once you're just, dog food, you're dog food. And I don't care what anybody says about a particular person. You start showing me evidence, right, and we're actually presenting. Someone says, you show them evidence, what you going to do? I actually go talk to them. So there it is. I think at that point, the interview, like you're going to see it, and my discussion with him on his history and how all the accomplishments that he had, and we're not even, someone might say, you guys have been going for 36 minutes. Well, we haven't really even touched what we could about his accomplishments. You'll hear it in the interview. I do want to say this too. This is a point number 2, if we could get it out in front of the people. I did it for young guys, and I did, let me say this way too. Someone watching, they might say, that's whatever they want to say, pig-headed that Caleb is 29 and he goes to talk to Rubel Shelly if he's going to make any headway. I don't think that Rubel Shelly has a problem saying that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what people would have been doing with Don DeWelt in any of their unity forums. Like if they go in and they're having a conversation with Don DeWelt and they're saying to Don DeWelt, we just wish you would stop using the piano. Is anybody going to say, well, who do you think you are coming to talk to Don DeWelt? They tried. I don't think that he had a problem. And I had to meet Rubel Shelly before February. He didn't have a problem.
He actually said to you, don't get messed up.
Yeah,
mess yourself up.
Yeah, he said, don't go messing yourself up fooling around with me. And then I said, I don't care what anybody says. And then reverse back, I gave him some information for our YouTube channel. I said, there's plenty of people that if you tell them you're going to do this with me, I said, they'll tell you, don't do it based on me. And then he said, well, I don't care what they say either. So there we were, just saying we don't care what anybody says.
So you're listening to Don DeWelt today, a segment of tape from one of the Tulsa workshops, and Marvin Phillips was talking to him. I've talked to Marvin Phillips just exactly like we're talking now, and Terry Rush, who were in charge of the Tulsa workshop in 1991 as a result of Larry West, who was running We Care campaigns all over the United States. We were basically, I was hoping that he would get canceled with the congregation that was sending me overseas. Mm-hmm. In fact, he did. But in that back and forth with Larry West, Marvin Phillips, and Terry Rush, Larry West came away saying, I know you love me. You're talking to me, you're trying to get the information, and I had my ducks in a row. Mm-hmm. And he said, other preachers that talk to me just want to skin me.
Right.
And I know that you really love me.
And again, I have always enjoyed that, the fact that you get to, all that's revolving around loads of people, just like it does right now. Like someone says, well, when we start making these changes, it's going to affect a lot of people. And Larry West hears it, doesn't get it bent out of shape, says, anything out of this, I know.
He actually said, Marvin Phillips and Terry Rush said, maybe we need to call Larry West. Maybe we're hurting his ministry. And so, you have individuals that genuinely appreciate that kind of attitude. Mm-hmm. And so, how many different people have we talked to? When you really get down to it, these high...
Oh, you have had a lot of conversation, like interview style. Earl Edwards, Jay Lockhart,
Stafford
North. And so, we'll see how things go, but I'm saying if they would give me the opportunity, and they're going to basically, they can look at the discussion and see what they think about it, but I'm saying there are a handful of people, if I can say across the aisle, that I have looked at, that to the same degree that I've looked at Rubel Shelly. I know their story, and other people don't. And they are these people who just get, the way that he says it is, and he'll say it in the 1984 open forum, he says, I've seen these people have their guts laid bare. Well, guts laid bare and Jason Rollo biting your head off, and you just don't know the stories. I think it matters. I think that hearing these people's background, they present Rubel Shelly just like he's just this, somehow he got in the picture and he just was an idiot and we thumped him. That's not at all an accurate representation.
Well, Caleb, I'm hoping that the interview will actually maybe help some of the individuals that were, bent on destroying him without even knowing. They don't know about these unity meetings, preachers' forums, where people like Keith Mosier got involved, mm-hmm. talking with Rubel Shelly, Alan Hires. And you have the opportunity to actually have heard individual apologizing to me as a result of being that way with me.
Right.
And
To their credit.
To their credit. And they had marked me off as a liberal. And if Billy Bland would tell this, I don't know why you wouldn't. If you know it's the case, instead of Memphis School of Preaching blackballing me, Billy Bland sat in Curtis Cates' office after I had written what Curtis said were derogatory things about him. They were factual. I went to Memphis, Tennessee, right after I put his newsletter in the mail. Went and sat down in his office, and Billy Bland was there as a witness. And at the end of it, Curtis Cates ended up saying the information that I was saying was correct about his fellowship. He doesn't like the way that I did it. And then number two, he said because I had never written anybody up. You know how they get to say that? I wasn't writing him up. He was doing things that were hurting me over here on the East Coast. And he said, because you did that, I don't think you were actually, your motives were wrong. Right. Because you've never written anybody up.
As I said earlier, I didn't just read Rubel's book, I read Contending for the Faith. So that's another, the way that you just said that, 2 layers of it that Billy Bland should, feel for you. Billy Bland does mission work in the Orient, right? However you want to say it. Second layer is he knew Ira Rice. And I read this article by Ira Rice, as you said, writing up, I won't be able to remember his name, but writing up an individual, and I read that and I thought, well, what? And they were sending the mail back to Washington State. And I thought, well, what does this have to do with Ira Rice? And then Ira Rice said it just the way you did. They're sending these men over here to Singapore. It's hurting me. Like, I understand you guys are going to appeal to congregational autonomy, but once you start sending these men into Singapore and I'm here and it's affecting me, he had to then write it up. And so,
Well, to be specific, Mac Lyon was going to Lipscomb University while we were actually withdrawing from people that were sending their children to Lipscomb University, and they were attending with Rubel Shelly. Within 6 months, one of them was basically saying, I'm an agnostic now. That's 2000 something or other Rubel Shelly at Ashwood. So it was hurting us. And Mac Lyon's protege is doing the same thing today, Phil Sanders.
Well, there's some things we'll talk about, like the young guy and his agnosticism. But I would like to put this now, because like we said, the interview and his accomplishments will speak for itself. I did want to go and have this interview so that everybody could see themselves.
Yeah.
Like, I think there are going to be a lot of people who are going to watch this and they're going to think to themselves, now, how does Caleb think he's going to get away with this? Like, 2-hour-long sit down with Rubel Shelly, and then he's going to talk to us about our fellowship. So I put Matthew 12 on the screen. I feel like this is the exact situation we all find ourselves in. He said unto them, have you not read what David did when he was a hungered that were with him, how he entered to the house of God and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests. And so the idea that Jesus had here was, if you're going to condemn me and my disciples for gathering corn on the Sabbath day, you're going to have to condemn King David for these extreme measures. And the idea is, of course, they're not going to condemn King David. So here's where I say everybody see themselves. There's no way that you're going to be able to say anything to me about sitting down for 2 hours to tell Rubel Shelly's story, when in reality, this is the 2023 Freed Hardeman Lectureship Brochure for such a time as this, Restoring God's People. You could replace any of those men with Rubel Shelly, and you would be in the exact same boat that you're in right now. So you've got Dale Maynor, who's an archaeologist, Bruce McClarty, who is the former president of Harding University, and he's a Pepperdine speaker. He's now the minister in residence at Freed Hardeman. David Shannon brought him in. This is Noel Whitlock. He's a Pepperdine speaker. And the interesting thing about these 3 men, too, is are they Pepperdine speakers? Yes. They're also Affirming the Faith speakers. You said the other night, Affirming the Faith is like...
The watering hole.
Yeah, and it's just this conduit to come in from OC, Abilene, and Pepperdine, and then you can make your entrance through these crowds, and then Steve Higginbotham and others. This is David Skidmore. He was on FHU Lectureship, and he's from Winterfest, and he's also appeared on Pepperdine Media. So all these men, it makes zero sense to me that everybody just gets to trash Rubel when you got 4 Pepperdine speakers up there. Nothing would change. Like if someone at this moment, they say, this is different. Rubel Shelly said in the early 90s, we need to start making more en routes for women involved in worship. They have no problem with that.
Yeah.
None of these men, they're all Pepperdine men, which means they have to go along with what they're doing in women's
Women
roles.
preachers,
That's right.
instrumental music while they're there, a cappella, Keith Lancaster, and Bruce McClarty was on the lectureship with Rubel Shelly. And it's just like, what's the difference in y'all having Rubel Shelly over at Frieda Hardeman?
Yeah. None.
None. That's exactly.
So there's no way that you can watch the interview and say, well, I don't know how he's going to do it. Well, y'all are way closer to Rubel Shelly than I've
Got a lot of information.
ever been. And so, I say take Rubel out, or take any of these four men and put Rubel in, you'd be in the same spot. To be honest, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes, and I had an audio clip of F. LaGard Smith saying the thing about the Old Testament prophets where they were in the know. There's so much back room that goes on. And so, I say take any of these four men out, put Rubel in. Do you know that Alan Hires posted this? He's in a, Stone Campbell chat room. And this is from A. Hires. Rubel was at church in Henderson last Sunday night. We were both in the building at the same time, and the roof did not cave in. November 14, 2012. So, Rubel cannot come back to the lectureship, but he can come to the Henderson congregation. And Alan Hires' takeaway is, we're both in the room together. We had our 1984 open forum. We're both in the room together, 2012, and the roof doesn't cave in. Well, to me, that sounds exactly like big F, little f. And so, one of the things that you said a moment ago about just the tearing down, he wasn't responding to everything, but I'm saying they started coming up with all these things about Rubel's going to do this, Rubel's going to do that, and we'll talk about it at the end. But they were saying, Rubel's going to do this, Rubel's going to do that. Well, in 1986, he wrote a small book that he wanted to be read. And in 1986, the end result was, if I was working in a congregation and they brought the piano in, I'd have to leave. They gave him no credit for that. And anything like they said, well, he was waffling. He may have put that in writing, but he was waffling. And then I say, yeah, and so was J.W. McGarvey. It's like he still gets to be honored posthumously.
Right.
And his books just praised and whatnot.
In the Newbern trial that basically dictated who's going to get the building and the split with the Christian Church and the Church of Christ, J.W. McGarvey actually testified for the Christian Church.
Yes, to have the property go back to the piano users. And so if you read this book, Hall Lowry Calhoun, the Christian Scholar, and I wanted to make another note about that. Well, how do you think you just get to go in and interview Rubel Shelly? The same way that someone can write a biography about Hall Lowry Calhoun, who in his time consistently was the compromiser, and no one bats an eye that Adrian Doran and J.E. Cho.
He said he was an unsung hero that nobody needs to know. There are a lot of people that are listening to this, Caleb. They're going to say, you cross the line when you're talking about Alan Hires. Alan Hires was the editor of The Spiritual Sword. Guess what?
So was Rubel Shelly?
Yeah, before him.
That's right.
Actually, co-founder of it, or actually got it started back when Thomas Warren had, because of his health, had to let it demise because of his health, and it was an they were opposing anti-ism for 1 year.
In the early to mid-'60s, if you look at volume 15 of Spiritual Sword, Thomas Warren will say that the paper was designed to combat anti-ism. But he got sick, and I don't know if it was his heart problem. He had heart problems, and he got sick. They had to cancel the paper, and then late 60s. This is in the interview, but it's like you would never know, so I'm not going to watch you interview. Well, you'll never know that if it weren't for Rubel Shelly, you wouldn't have Spiritual Sword magazine. Right. Like, it wouldn't even be there for Alan Hires to take over, years later. So what's the problem with somebody saying, why don't you hear the whole story? And I think that people, and let's say it this way too, there has to be something. There has to be something to it to where just loads of preaching school teachers just don't read it. I wouldn't waste my time with it. It's like, I have read so many books that they have told me not to. If it's junk, it's junk. But they are worried about you finding out something that just...
What happened when you asked for the documentation that's at Memphis School of Preaching?
That green book, I don't know if they'll be able to see it. This is the 1992 Harding Preaching Forum, Harding Graduate Preaching Forum, and Keith Mosier and Rubel Shelly cover the topic of Romans 4 and James 2. I called the Memphis Library, and I said, first, if you got a cassette tape, I'd love to hear it in audio. I said, if not, I'd take a book. And the librarian took my name and my number, and she called back, and she said, we don't have a cassette, but we do have a book. And then I said, oh, that's fantastic. I said, you're at least telling me it exists. She goes, what are you going to do with it? And I said, just for research. And she said, into what? And I said, at that moment, I said, I am doing research on Rubel Shelly. And she goes, are you going to try to use this to hurt Brother Mosier in some way? And I just, for the life of me, that Keith Mosier needs the librarian's help.
That you're a threat at 30 years old to Keith Mosier.
Yeah.
This is the same thing we're talking about. Rubel Shelly, he's been preaching for 20 years, basically, 18 to 20 years, and he's such a threat, and you don't know the story? I mean, get your information. And as we said, we're not recommending. We've been on Rubel Shelly's case for the last, 4 or 5 years, showing individuals that you all are involved with that they're on the same lectures with him. So, and that's what some people said in the post on some of our YouTubes. Y'all, we're just getting on Rubel Shelly, and now you're doing an interview? It's because you all do not understand the basics of us ever trying to have unity.
Right.
It takes this kind of stuff for us to know these individuals and touch bases. Who knows, Caleb, in the long run? Rubel's 77. 77, and he's basically retired from Harpeth Hills, and he was the president of one of the colleges in one of the colleges that's gets to be called brotherhood colleges, but they're really 16. Not. Yeah, one of the 16 that Kirk Brothers is involved with. And you never know the inroad that you can now make. And there's no doubt. Have you talked to him since the interview?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember now.
Different occasions. Actually, I got him in contact with Brad Harrop.
Yeah.
It sounds like Brad Harrop is a neurobiologist. Brad is a neurobiologist, and Rubel has his PhD in philosophy. But Rubel Shelly wrote a book against homosexuality, and when he told me that, like the first time I met him, he said, I'm going to finish this book by January 31st, and he said, it's on LGBT. And I said, as soon as I tell anybody that you're in here writing a book on LGBT, I said, everybody's going to say, was he for it?
Yeah.
And he said, no. He laughed with me. We laughed. But then he said, no, any sex outside of marriage is sin. He said, anything that homosexuals are doing as far as sexual activity is sin. And so, but I have said that on our own broadcast, one of my own broadcasts, where I said, you could teach a homosexual. They could be a eunuch for the kingdom's sake as much as an adulterer could. So I think that's kind of where he's coming at. But to people's surprise, they would just flippantly say he's probably going to make a way for him to be okay. So, I mean, how does everybody feel about that? Can I add a layer to that too? You read the history and you start finding out, I don't really have a problem, with this. I find the stuff out about Alan Hires and the inconsistencies, and I go to school, I find out all these inconsistencies. They're people, so I'm not looking for perfection. What I don't like is these people who have consistencies then just start ripping to shreds someone who has different inconsistencies. So this is not in the interview, but, when I say, does that make sense? Alan Hires wrote a whole book against Rubel Shelly, big F, little f, because Rubel said there are layers to fellowship. And then years later, Alan Hires is making the post. Rubel Shelly was at Henderson Sunday night. We were both in the building at the same time, and the roof did not cave in. So if you have that red book, red and white, it's on the screen. There is no telling. So here's the thing. You guys, you're in school. You're going to graduate. They're going to play you like a puppet. And I hate to be that way, but that's how it's going to be. You're going to see their inconsistencies, and you're going to see that they're actually giving room to other guys that they don't give you. So if you read this book, if you listen to the audio, there's just no telling the inconsistencies that Rubel Shelly was seeing. And he starts doing his writing, doing his speaking. He's trying to figure the information out. People are introducing him, Bob Hooper is introducing him to historical documents. So he said, listen to this statement to Alan Hires about instrumental music.
Answer it, but Brother Blank's writing a book right now that'll expose you. Sounds like a classic case of having one's mind made up so that he need not be confused with facts.
One brother reviewed a speech of mine in which I dared suggest there are Christians outside our fellowship and said repeatedly that the words here are fine, but you have to look deeper to discern my true meaning. We're notorious for choosing up sides around strong personalities, and I pray to God you didn't come here today to hear four men speak with the idea of choosing sides or come determined not to alter your opinion of anything on the basis of what you might learn. Some have adopted a posture of such rigid dogmatism, for example, that they've served notice that for a person to forsake the to do a charitable and Christian deed for the sake of unity, to do a dishonest and unethical thing and repenting of something he doesn't really regard as evil, that he would have several brethren among us to this fellowship who don't believe in instrumental music in worship being wrong, and few, if any of us, belong to congregations that don't have some people like that. I've never preached for one that didn't. He doesn't realize that he'll then have to decide what to do with those among us who don't use instrumental music in corporate worship but sing with accompaniment in private and family settings. And Alan and I have been present in situations where he'd sing and I wouldn't. Maybe his position's changed. Mine hasn't. I still can't in public or private.
Now, for people who said I don't know what that was, Rubel just said to Alan Hires in front of this whole audience, Alan Hires is beating up on these people in the Christian church over the piano. Rubel Shelly said there are people who attend congregations of the Church of Christ where they don't have a problem with piano. And he says, Alan Hires wants us to weed them out. He said, well, they're never going to want it in worship. And Rubel says, but what if they play Amazing Grace on their piano and sing at home? And Rubel Shelly himself said, I've seen Alan Hires do it, and I don't. Why does that not account for anything? Like, the inconsistencies just don't matter while you guys are eviscerating him. And he's saying, these are the inconsistencies that I'm seeing. So,
and we're bringing up now, I mean, as a real-time point, Alan Hires is not saying anything about Pepperdine people being on Freed Hardeman.
Now, someone might say, Alan Hires is older than Rubel Shelly. Alan Hires just spoke on PTP.
That's exactly right.
He could do it. Like, if y'all are going to keep putting him up there, and if he feels up to it, then let him do it. You know,
Is he on the roster for an interview? If he would be willing to do it?
If he'd be willing to do it, he's on the roster.
Do you think he would be willing to do it? And if not, why not? And as we get into this, you're going to be saying, people are going to be saying, why do y'all think that y'all get to start asking for this role? Listen, we're already in this role. As you mentioned, all the different people that have talked to us, it's recorded. We have basically helped them change. I'm not saying they changed on their own, like they wanted to change. No, you got ousted as a result of us playing the interview. And so what is our goal here? Well, it's certainly not to get into any party.
No.
We're just fine where we are. And the ability to interview people like Rubel Shelly at this point, why wouldn't Keith Mosier be willing to interview? Well, what did he say about his reasoning for not debating Rubel Shelly?
He always told us in class, Keith Mosier always said, number one, he talked trash about Rubel. You know, he'd get that good and go and talk trash about Rubel. And he said, no, but I never debated him because I can't control my temper. That is not a valid excuse. Like that, you're big time self-detriment there. That you're saying he's such a, just this threat that needs to be handled, but I can't do it because I just can't not blow up on him. But
you're teaching in a preaching school and you can't control your temper.
Right.
I mean, and I've seen his behavior in preaching school. I went to Memphis School of Preaching when Keith Mosier had not been very long a full-time preacher, a full-time teacher. And, if somebody's listening to this and you're hearing what we're saying, ask Keith Mosier, why wouldn't you actually debunk what they're saying? I mean, you can't debunk what we're actually saying in regard to why would William Woodson, why would Alan Hires be willing to get involved in these kind of meetings? Like if I were to ask y'all to have a meeting and tell why, let's hash it out as to why I'm blackballed by the Memphis School of Preaching. I'm not going to do it, but they were willing to do that twice. Open forum, let this dude come to the open forum. We have that.
We have the red and white book.
And you have audio of him actually talking to him at the open forum in Freed Hardeman.
That's right. I have
so
1984.
Why would they let Rubel Shelly come to the open forum and have it out with Alan Hires?
Yeah. And one thing that someone might say now, like they say, well, if this is the way things are going, why would Keith Mosier or Alan Hires interview? Well, I would say this. Watch this, see how fair it is, and then say, I could do that with anybody.
Yeah.
And so I would. I would interview Keith Mosier But I do have to say, the way that things stand right now is, I don't think that I could even come to the Memphis School of Preaching campus. So, like, what do y'all think? I mean, here we are sitting in the library. Y'all think I'm going to be, like, ripping books off the wall? You know, it's just, I'm sitting here. He's 77. Keith Mosier is older than that. And this was a simple setup, and I want to have a moment. Thank you. Special thank you to my nephew, Tanner. He came with me, and he interviewed it. He audioed it. I'm saying he did all that engineering, so thank you for that. Very simple. It's me, a guy, one camera, 2 lights, and a laptop. Keith Mosier could do that easily. And, you know, I make it convenient for folk. Alan hires too. Can I go back to that point about the inconsistency? Why someone says that's being petty?
Can I add one thing to that? Rubel Shelly's wife was extremely ill during that time frame, and he still granted you an interview with the idea that he might even have to leave because of it. And so when we're saying that, how gracious was that?
Very. Like he told me, he said, nobody here knows that. Everyone does now. And I'm not saying because you said it, it has been announced. And he said, she has a very aggressive cancer. And he said, we'll schedule this for the end of February. He said, but you do have to realize that if it comes a moment where I have to say Myra doesn't feel well, he said, I can't come out. And I said, well, yeah. You know, if we're going to reschedule, we will. And if it just doesn't work, it doesn't work. So that was very gracious. But the inconsistency part, someone might say I was being petty. That's just a petty thing against, this whole situation. No, I've had a Baptist music minister, Aaron Stewart, who really thought he was going to get me based on this inconsistency. I'm making all these arguments for the New Testament promoting, all the information I have in the New Testament is to have congregational singing. And he really thought he had me, and Aaron said, I bet you play amazing, he said, you play piano, you probably play Amazing Grace on your piano. And he really thought he had me, and I said, no, I don't do that either. And I don't have an Elvis Presley record, How Great Thou Art. He really thought he was going to get me. So this is not a little nominal tidbit of pettiness. No, that's how Baptists are thinking. Second point about, it's not just a little thing. Tom Holland, everybody remember the preacher Tom Holland? He's died. I talked to Tommy Holland, which is Tom Holland's son. And I, told him, he said something about a book. I commented and said, hey, I read that book too. Can I talk to you about it? And I just started talking about instrumental music because he doesn't have a problem with it. And he said one of the biggest things that got him was when he was a kid, he said, I would drive my dad to his meetings. He said, I'd drive my dad, he said, for him to be somewhere and he'd preach 30 minutes against instrumental music. He said, we'd get back in the car and I'd drive him home. And he said, we would listen to the Chuck Wagon Gang, which was gospel music with instruments backtrack. And Tommy asked his dad, how come we can't do it in worship, but we can do it in the car? And Tom Holland told his son, according to Tommy, he said, well, that's just why. Because we're not in worship. We're in the car. Plus, these people are members of the church. So that makes it really good. And Tommy Holland said, that's not going to work.
I just got through watching some of the lectureship at Texas School of Preaching. Not a lectureship, it was actually the men's conference, young men's conference. And I heard Amari French wear folk out at that young men's conference for doing that very thing and giving the scripture that the ungodly's productions are an abomination unto the Lord, and just excellent material. Now, how many people you think were in there that actually do that? Because it's a very common thing.
It's very common.
Very common.
We had, they probably didn't know better. And to be honest, they would have known better. We had guys in Memphis who were doing things like that, but we had one student in class specifically ask Bobby Liddell, is that okay? Mm-hmm. Bobby Liddell wouldn't answer him. He just kept saying, I'm not going to do it. And then the student rightfully said, yeah, you may not do a lot of things that I would do, that God would allow me to do. Will God allow me to do it? Bobby Liddell would never answer. Mm-hmm. I was like, what's the point going to school? We're not even going to get any of these discussion points. This one is a small one. You watch the 2 hours of me sitting down with him, you're going to at some point say, Caleb didn't do any rebuking. Yeah, well, a number of y'all are saying this. I have to get to know Steve Higginbotham. I have to get to know Phil Sanders before I can start correcting him. So let's just say I adopted your playbook, because that's what everybody's doing. Number one, you're not going to be in the room with Rubel Shelly. You guys haven't done it before now. They're not going to do it. I don't think I'm just saying the amount of people that I asked, did you actually read Rubel's book? No. So here it is. Y'all aren't doing it. You're not talking to Steve Higginbotham. You're not talking to Phil Sanders. And then we have people just flat out saying, and I'm not going to. They're just going to, it's not my business. So I would really encourage you, try to see the big picture rather than just, some people are going to watch it and they're going to watch it for what it is. For someone who's going to say that, I don't think I could really do too much with them. And what you said about the fact that his wife was sick and he gave me the opportunity, gave me his time and his wife is dying, because he said it is very aggressive. I have this moment now where we said we want you to see yourself in the lectureships. Do you feel like we covered that one sufficiently? See yourself in the lectureships?
Just barely. With Freed Hardeman you talking about?
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm saying if we move on to this one, would you be fine with?
Sure.
Okay. Me and you, right? I think it speaks volumes about you that Rubel lets me come in his office and says, yeah, I'll do it. Don't get yourself in trouble, but I'll do it. And I cannot talk to y'all. Now, let's all be honest. Steve Higginbotham's etiquette for Facebook, totally fictitious. Don't give me that stuff. So someone says, well, I just don't like when you tag me. Big deal. You have a thing where you can say, don't notify me about this post anymore. So, someone says, well, you're the way you are on Facebook. It's information. Either you want to put your head in the sand or whatever. But this is documented. This is not fictitious. This is Denny Petrello's email. If Caleb called me, I'd have no interest in talking to him. Why? You talked to Stafford North while he was on faculty, on staff at Bear Valley.
And Jay Lockhart.
Both of them. How is it that they say yes? And they're just talking. And Denny Petrello says, I wouldn't even talk to him if he called me. And as you said a moment ago,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have said it that way myself. You're the director of the school, and you can't take a 30-year-old's phone call? There's a problem here.
And you're telling somebody in Thailand this.
Yeah.
So you're talking about.
They're not even following their own rule of,
Right.
well, you need to talk to them first.
Yeah.
Well, he's not even talking to me.
And this guy was a former student, grown man in his 60s probably, and he's basically taking the time to actually question Denny Petrello and the things that he's doing. And Denny Petrello, and he said something about seeing some of our information, and Denny Petrello then tears into us, and the gentleman ends up sending us the email from Thailand.
So before I put the next quote up, I wanted to say this a little bit earlier. And do you think it's outlandish? Like if we say it and someone's no. Do you think we're far from 1906?
Oh, no. As far as splitting?
Yeah.
No.
Now, one part of this, someone might say just too much history. Like you talked about Marvin Phillips, Don DeWelt, and people don't know who that is. Again, get your head out of the sand. Do you think that 1906 would have happened without the man named Daniel Summers?
No.
No. It's like
alerting people to what was going on.
Yes. People say, oh, yes, I know 1906. Yeah, but do you know the 1880s when Daniel Summer was putting out his document? That even David Lipscomb, like we start talking about, I don't like how you did it. That was David Lipscomb. I don't really like how Daniel Summers goes about it, but I don't disagree with him. I don't think 1906 would have happened without Daniel Summers. And so what I'm saying now is if history repeats itself, we're not going to come to 1906 unless we start having some Daniel Summers.
One student in the College of the Bible wrote 300 preachers. And that one student actually brought about a catalyst of bringing down how many very high dignitaries on the College of the Bible and creating, a awareness where it ended up getting in all the Brotherhood papers of what was going on in College of the Bible, modernism that was going in there. So if you think that one person and one person without any clout cannot make a difference, that book is for you. This book, Calhoun, The Christian Scholar, it is for you. This guy, the reason called The Christian Scholar is because he was one of the most educated people at that time. Did he have a doctorate degree from both Harvard and Princeton?
I don't know what they would have amounted to. He attended both.
Yeah. Well, he was actually a fellow, was he not? Or he actually graduated all the
And he was
trimmings.
certainly one of the first ones to accomplish that. So, also that's where someone says, oh, here's that book. Someone says, well, you just think so highly of yourself. You said anybody could do that and get something done. I think highly of truth and evidence. It doesn't matter. Everybody shoot the messenger. I don't care who the messenger is. And honestly, they don't either.
Yeah.
It's the information. So what he was saying, this is for you. You ought to read this book. I just want to be a Christian, read that book. Here's the second one. It says a lot that Rubel Shelly will say, yeah, I'll sit down with you. And you were in Bryan College Station. You called both Terrence Dindy and Jason Rollo.
And can document it.
Left messages. Did you send texts?
Yes.
Yeah, texts, phone calls. I am in BCS. I would like to see you.
While they are actually saying to you, y'all should have talked to us.
And they don't respond.
Right.
No answer. So what are we supposed to do? Denny doesn't want to talk to me. Terrence Dindy doesn't want to talk to Dad. Jason Rollo doesn't want to talk to him. This is, I never know how to say his name. He's the director of East Tennessee in Knoxville, Will Heinstein. And the thing about it too is Will has active students who call me, and they do not like how things are going. And I'm saying, you ought to be able to make a case for something, and if nothing else, I said you ought to be able to make an appeal for your own conscience and the fact that the school won't grant that. And so, we go, and it's like, if you see the Robertsons coming, lock the door. Again, what do you think we're going to do? Like, we're not here to just trash the campus. And when that active students, we went to the East Tennessee campus in Knoxville because you wanted to try to see Rod Rutherford, who was your former teacher. And the way you said it too was, it's Monday night. Preaching schools do wives class Monday night. So we pull in. It is the case. Everybody's there. The door is open. We come in. Will Heinstein comes out. Dad says, well, I'd like to see Rod Rutherford. He's here. Well, he's not here. What are y'all doing? And so we had just come back from Freed Hardeman, I think is how that was. We're
on the way to get books from Jim Waldron.
Okay, on the way to get books from Jim Waldron. We asked Will Heinstein about Freed Hardeman, new to art. I'm not going on the record. I'm not doing it. And the odd thing, like I'm saying, why Will Heinstein? Can't you just tell people this about me? He talks to us. He says, I don't want to get on the record. Rod is not here. And then I say, can we look at your library before we go? And he says, yes. And then at some point he starts following me, looking through the library. Look, you don't talk. Will Heinstein can at least say, don't talk to him. Let him see your library and then let him go. That's all. At that point, we're not getting anything. Let me see your library.
And what was Caleb doing wanting to see the library? He's trying to get somebody to like sell you Image Magazine.
Image Magazine.
So that he can do this interview. It's the idea of finding out what happened to these guys, what happened to different ones. Why is our brotherhood so fragmented?
Right.
What really happened? And that's really all that was behind that. I mean, how many different places have you been trying to see Image Magazine and different people that you've talked to, trying to get copies of all of these old magazines so you can read them yourself? And how would you have not? Loads. How would Caleb have known that Rubel Shelly was the editor for like 4 years of one of the most well-known papers in the Brotherhood? I'm not naming it because I don't want to spoil it on the interview. It's because he's reading volume 1, 2, 3, and 4 of these Brotherhood papers, all of them.
Yeah. And so this have a plug. If you are somebody who has physical copies of Image Magazine and you don't mind selling them, then I'm someone who'd like to buy them. And Wineskins, and Integrity, and Levin. I read all across the board. I have most of the Firm Foundations and Contending for the Faith. I had someone offer me on my December trip, and he probably still would. He said, if you want, and his statement was, and I'm just saying, I spend the night with him, and he says, I've got all the Gospel Advocates if you want them. He said, I don't know anybody your age who wants to read them. And I said, well, if you do that, then yeah, I would love to have it. Now, here's a big one. This really, y'all, so Jason Rollo says, I want to bite his head off and eat it with mustard. And then he kind of pulls back and says, no, but we got to be nice because we want to talk to these people. No, look, y'all want Rubel to take you seriously. You do not take Rubel's Shelly seriously, and you ought to. And this is what I had in a Bible class recently. We're having all these conversations with about fellowship right now between, he doesn't talk to me, but Don Blackwell and B.J. Clark and just on and on and on. When you said earlier about 2015 at Portland, you said Brian Kenyon, or Jay Lockhart, but you also did say Brian Kenyon.
Brian Kenyon.
Yeah. So everybody was getting touched, and it's like, y'all can't have a problem. This is what y'all were doing through the 80s and the 90s. And as you said, you were in the Pacific for the 90s. There's a lot of stuff that you would have just missed. So everybody starts getting touched. Well, now everybody's up in arms. And now that everybody's up in arms, nobody can define what fellowship is. And my point is, if you read I Just Want to Be a Christian, Rubel Shelly will tell you what fellowship is. And this is that moment where I say, if you listen to Keith Mosier, he's just going to tell you Rubel's an idiot. And it's like, how is it that he got it right? I'm saying this is a very, very close copy of Billy Bland's definition of fellowship from 1992. He says, the word bears the meaning of holding a share in something or sharing an enterprise, fellow, participant, partner, to share in something with another, to take part, to have share in a project, means partnership, participation, and fellowship. Now, you brought some audio. Everybody knows, let me say it this way too, everyone knows that they're having fellowship only until they start feeling uncomfortable. Like if they think that you're going to start questioning them about, there are Pepperdine speakers on Freed Hardeman this year. Now they're going to suddenly draw blanks. Here is B.J. Clark, and this is at the BCS.
June of this year. Young men's after Freed Hardeman.
After he had been with 4 Pepperdine speakers. Right. And they just went ahead and used them. Listen to B.J. and his discussion on fellowship.
Everyone to the bright and morning star that we heard about from Brother Bonner. And boy, just being here, this singing, this fellowship, being up close and personal like we've been, if I didn't say a word and someone else came up here and preached right now, I would still feel like Tish and I had spent our time very, very valuably.
What constitutes the fellowship? The singing of songs? Because I'm sure y'all sang songs with Pepperdine speakers.
Yeah.
Is it the praying? Is it the singing of the songs? Is it the sharing the pulpit? Is it just being there and saying, this is a good thing? Why is it that he can understand that? Rubel Shelly got it in the book. BJ says, after he had been on with 4 Pepperdine speakers, and he comes where Jason Rollo is an elder, and I don't know who all else is an elder. Tom Moore might be an elder, but Terrence Dendy in the audience. He's the director of the school. Yeah. He doesn't have a problem with this?
He mentioned people that were there, and in the maroon jacket, it's Rick Popejoy. He's there, and Omari French is there. They're all having fellowship with B.J. Clark, and B.J. Clark has no problem.
Yeah, that's big F, little F, just in case you were wondering.
Exactly what it is. He has no problem being with 4 different Pepperdine speakers on Freed Hardeman. And that's not to mention all the people that have been at Affirming the Faith with other Pepperdine people throughout the years. Has B.J. ever been to Affirming the Faith? I know that Ralph Gilmore has been on Affirming the Faith with several Pepperdine speakers. Ralph Gilmore was in 2023, was actually on Crowley's Ridge lectureship with a 2023 Pepperdine speaker, Tim Martin, and Steve Clore. Guys on Pepperdine, have been on Pepperdine, and there's Ralph Gilmore, there's Dave Miller, there's Kirk Brothers, all of them in fellowship with these. Are they in fellowship? B.J. Clark says you are.
So I don't know if I might, at some point I'm a human, so you're going to give me something. It's either B.J. Clark or Steve Higginbotham where they said, I don't know who was there.
That's B.J. Clark.
Yeah,
that's the Bear Valley lectures.
I don't know who was there. I did my lesson. I got on the plane. But it's like he's distancing himself from Bear Valley.
And Stafford North gets on the same lectureship and says this is great fellowship.
Yeah.
And so it's just, you guys are you're looking terrible. And these guys that are running preaching schools.
So that's me now. I'm saying I can't read 1980s material and put up participate in this. Right. I cannot read how y'all were just tearing into people and now we're just going to do it.
Yeah.
Like, So this is that moment where you said the agnosticism earlier. This is why we lose young guys.
That's right.
Is because they get involved and they start saying like, well, why do we get to do it? Why is this permissible over here? Well, because they're our friends. Because they make donations to the school. Because they help me get meetings. But your friends are not going to get a pass. So, no, you're just not going to get a pass. Your friends are not going to get a pass. And it's like, Drew Leonard's my friend. We're not great friends right now. Because, he doesn't like a lot of the ways that I do things. But when I say people get a pass, but your friends don't, Eddie Kraft, Wesley Simon's giving a pass all over the place. Drew was going to have me in his wedding, and Eddie told him, if you have Caleb, I'm not doing your wedding. Well, how are y'all giving a pass to everybody else? And it's not like someone says, oh, now it's getting personal. I'm not losing sleep because I wasn't in Drew's wedding. I'm just saying, they're doing that to Drew. They're going to do it to other people. I was always, going back and forth into Wesley's office and trying to put pressure on me, and then he's saying, like, we're going to put you out, and I just say, okay, I'll leave the school. And then someone says, it's just the nature of things. No, it's not. That's ungodly. It's like just this, that's Matthew 23, the open hypocrisy. We're going to do it to these people. We're not going to do it to these people.
Well, somebody's going to say, Caleb, you're bitter because, you had to leave the school or whatever. The instance where you were basically seeing yourself forced to leave the school in your own mind, like making that decision, you had just come back from a lectureship that was like 50 times the size of anything that Tri-City School would ever put on.
Right.
We were in the car on the way back from the lectureship at Portland, the Gulf Coast. I mean, you got guys like Jerry Moffitt, Tommy Hicks. I could just go on and on the people that were on that lectureship. Why would you say Jason Rollo? These are all the people they're rubbing shoulders with, and it's like, we cut our own throat there in 2015. That was the idea, but the elders actually went along with what was said when I was calling out all these names and putting the pressure and the information out there where it could not be refuted. They made their decision to stop supporting just about all of the preaching schools.
Yes, and
in 2015. So there's no animosity here. This is wake up.
And like I said, Wesley called me upset on Monday. I said I knew he would.
Yeah.
But then when we get done, I tell him, I'm not actually talking trash about you. I tell people the best teacher I had. Here's one more. BJ, he understands fellowship when he wants to.
Resurrection of Jesus Christ. What a beautiful sermon. We're going to end with a closing song and a closing prayer, but I do want to say this much. 2 Timothy 2:2 talks about faithful men. We're able to teach others also, and I just want to tell you something. Brother Clark, you at the Memphis School of Preaching, and Brother Terrence Brownlow Denny at the Texas School of Preaching, I have absolute confidence in you two good men in all that you're doing.
And I bid you Godspeed.
Okay.
Bid you both Godspeed in that.
Now, he did that right after the both of us had made it very, very public that there were 4 Pepperdine speakers on with B.J. Clark, and B.J. Clark does not say anything publicly.
Right.
And then Jason Rollo just says, I have all confidence in B.J. Clark, and I bid you Godspeed.
And the reason why I was trying to talk to Terrence Dendy and B.J. Clark, and Jason Rollo was because they had a fit about a broadcast that Caleb did where he talked about them being with B.J. Clark and not saying anything about the fellowship issues. It was in Nesbitt, Mississippi. Rick Popejoy was on it. Omari French was on it. Keith Mosier was on it. And Jason Rollo and Terrence Dendy, all of them on this lectureship. And Caleb, they were talking about standing in the gap. Y'all, when we use Jeremiah 6, you don't get to use Jeremiah 6 that you're standing in the gap if you're actually opening the gap and you're in full fellowship with these guys that are allowing the things that we're talking about to go on. And they just went, especially Terrence Dendy, he went ballistic. I go to talk to them. You think I'm getting any room? I wasn't there to talk to them at BCS. I was actually working in their area at the time, interviewing the Cowboy Church a mile away from them, and never got a chance to talk to them. It's a loss to me because I've known Jason Rollo since late 90s. James Oldfield was working at the congregation where Jason Rollo's daddy was an elder. James Oldfield moved here in 1999 from that congregation. We basically gave him a parachute to get out of that congregation, as a matter of fact. So don't act like we don't know y'all and we don't run with the same. Yeah. I was never in their party, in their group, but I rubbed shoulders with them as a result of being in mission work and raising funds.
And, we know, like you say, don't act like we don't know, but also don't act like we don't have anything going on. Sometimes this is odd. We're just taking this time to do this. Well, someone has to, because Jason Rollo was just bidding Godspeed to B.J. Clark after sharing the pulpit before Pepperdine speakers. But like Sunday night, I've got new footage coming up with a Baptist street preacher. So I mean, we can do this and stay busy. So here's the next point about y'all want Rubel to take you seriously. Here's what I mean by this. When I say y'all want Rubel to take you seriously, there are young guys who are going through school and they say, oh, if we could just get some of these people to read a Thomas Warren book. The Bible only makes Christians only the only Christians. If we could just get them to read Thomas Warren. And someone said they probably won't. You know, we could mail it to them. They probably wouldn't do it. I mail y'all books. I wonder if y'all read them. You know, because it's not a party personality. So you're going to have to take them seriously. Now, here's the next one. This is a quote, and Dad and I have experienced this in multiple places. So one of the things that they really got bent out of shape with Rubel Shelly about was that he quoted everybody's heroes back at them. So if you read his book, you said earlier, this book, while it might look a little thick, it's only 107 pages long. After the 107 pages, he has quotations of other people.
From 1920's Gospel Advocate, basically saying, and there any of y'all out there, I don't want to interrupt your point there, but any of y'all that are out there, if you don't know that the Gospel Advocate and their practices in the 1920s are the reason why you have the firm foundation. The Advocate was actually being accused of allowing people to come in on their denominational baptism. Firm Foundation was started by Austin McGarry and followed up with Showalter, and that's what they were actually fighting about. And so the very things we're talking about are being documented by Rubel Shelly. In other words, the things that they're coming down on him. He's saying these guys in the 1920s in the Gospel Advocate, they were doing the exact same thing. They were saying we're not the only Christians. The proof of it is they let people come in on their denominational baptism, and the Firm Foundation came to be as a result of that. So you cannot say that this was not going on.
And he reads it and says, why are y'all tearing into me as if y'all are not keeping these people on a pedestal? So
M.B. Hardeman.
Here's the quote from M.B. Hardeman, and you can find it in the Tabernacle Sermons, page 125 of volume number 3.
And if you don't have it, we'll try to help get you one.
Yeah. And
I know we have extra copies.
That, or it might even be on PDF. This is what M.B. Hardeman said. Volume number 3, page 125. I have never been so egotistic as to say that my brethren with whom I commune on the first day of the week are the only Christians on earth. So that is that statement of Thomas Warren said the Bible only makes Christians only and the only Christians. M.B. Hardeman said, no, I'm only a Christian. But M.B. Hardeman said, I'm not going to say I'm the only Christian. And so Rubel writes a tract before he wrote the book, and the tract is about unity. And they all start tearing into him, and he says, I don't understand why I'm getting the grief when y'all love N.B. Hardeman. Now, this is where I want to say again for the young guys who are agnostic, they go to our schools and they turn into agnostic. Like, let's not all pretend like we don't know somebody who did that. So, as if someone says, well, this is what, early 1900s when N.B. Hardeman said that. You have run into this while the few meetings that you have done. They practice this, and they tear up Rubel Shelly for writing what they practice. So, where would you have run into that?
Well, actually, where Bobby Liddell was attending, Munford, Tennessee, Munford supported me for the entire time I was in the Pacific, and then over here, I would say 25 years. And so and when you said not many meetings, I don't like to do meetings, and one of the few meetings that I would do would be for people that support me. So they basically said, you need to come and do a meeting over here. So I go over there and I'm preaching a meeting at Munford, and end up a lady who was welcomed in on her Pentecostal baptism.
Who was preaching at the time? Is it Sam?
Yeah, Sam Dilbeck. And
Wilcutt,
yeah. So Sam didn't know anything about it, but I'm saying he was thrilled to death. And the husband of this young lady was thrilled to death. They shook her in on her Pentecostal baptism. She comes forward and says, I know now that I was not a Christian. And same thing in Greenville, Texas.
Yes.
I'm doing a meeting there. The only reason I'm doing a meeting in Greenville, Texas, same thing. They support me. I hadn't agreed to do a meeting, but this was in the time frame where Dan Winkler's son, and he ended up being killed by his wife, and so they were saying, he's going to have to postpone the meeting. I said, I'll do the meeting for you for free. Don't postpone it and bring Dan Winkler.
Just don't use Dan.
Use Dan Winkler. Yeah. So I go and preach the meeting, and same thing. A Baptist lady that they had welcomed in on her Baptist baptism. She ends up obeying the gospel as well. Her husband is thrilled to death. And it's just, this is going on in our brotherhood all the time. There's congregations everywhere that's welcome people in on their Baptist baptism.
If you are a young guy, like I said, I made this for young guys that are coming out of preschool. If you see this quote and you say, oh, I don't like that quote, get ready to see it everywhere.
Right.
And so one of the things that when you said that one was Pentecostal, you know, a person coming from the Pentecostal sect will tell you they were baptized for remission of sins.
Right, Acts 2:38, speaking in tongues.
You're going to have to ferret that.
Yeah.
So I had that happen. It's not as, you know, Bobby Liddell isn't going there. This is just a little country congregation in Texas. But I get done with my lesson, and it's a nighttime lesson because I'm going around to a handful of places to report. And, I'm going to say things about the one church versus sectarianism. And so when I get done, somebody pulls me aside and they say, well, whoever is not probably going to like that. I said, well, who's that? And he said, well, he pays the water bill around here. And I said, why is he going to have a problem with that? They said, well, he is a Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think I'd do? We start having the conversation right now. I said, this is y'all's problem. What I just did is going to help him.
Yeah.
I let him know what he needs to hear. I said, this is on y'all for even letting him pay the water bill. Like he's not a member.
Yeah.
And y'all started giving him responsibility. I said, y'all are the ones who confused him. And so,
And so this is a common thing too. One of the times you were in Texas, Oklahoma, you're actually giving a presentation, talking about the work and talking about these different schools and things they do. And it comes out, Donnie Bates' mother is here tonight.
Yeah. And actually when that was said to me, they said, just so you know, Donnie Bates' mother's here. And before I could even say anything, he goes, that's okay.
Yeah. Very good.
She needs to hear that. And it's Dick Pogue.
Yeah.
Like I'm saying, if Donnie Bates gets to hear this, Dick Pogue was behind what I was saying.
Yeah.
Donnie Bates' mother here, she needs to hear it. That's okay.
And Donnie Bates was on affirming the faith lectures with individuals that are Pepperdine.
Yeah. Donnie Bates is not helping Dick Pogue out with Phil Sanders either.
No.
Like, these are just congregations and people around there, and someone says, well, you're outing yourself by saying these supporters' names. He wants to do what's right. And it's like I do too, so I'm not really worried about that.
And none of this stuff that we're talking about is done in a corner. We're constantly doing this on YouTube, which everybody sees.
Right. So now, I think that all this, we're about to shift, and it's, we're at a good point to do it. Is there anything else that you want to say about maybe some I'm just saying for young guys, get ready to see this stuff. They will just beat you over the head for stuff that they're doing. There's the opening quote, and I say this to him in the interview. One of the opening quotes is about bureaucracy. You'll just have to watch the interview so you can get it. Something that started with the founders. I'm not even going to try to do it. But he talks about what you said, doing in a corner. Power moves, power struggles, back rooms. It's in the interview. So when you see that, just get ready for it. I said this in the Bible class the other day, preachers are always the movable pawn. The eldership's not going anywhere.
Right.
The school's not going anywhere. The preacher can always be fired. So I don't have any animosity for anybody that I'm having these conversations with. I am doing it for the young guys. They need to know more than they know. In the history, they certainly need to know more than they know. And if history repeats itself, then y'all need to get ready. Anything else?
No.
Okay. So here's a whole separate segment. Check out the interview. It'll be out tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Here's a moment, okay, where I basically have to just go through you. Someone says, why do y'all even think y'all get to talk to us this way? What type of question is that? Who do y'all think y'all are that you can't be talked to this way? You are a blood-bought child of God. You're not God. You know what I'm saying? It's like, just as an example, Curtis Case wouldn't let you call him Curtis.
Right.
Had you already been in the Pacific?
Yes.
So he does a 6-year stint in the Pacific, and when he comes home from a third world country, he can't even say the name your mama gave you.
Yeah.
Curtis.
Yeah.
To Wesley Simon's credit, I said an opening prayer somewhere for Wesley at one of the meetings he was doing. And when he got done with it, he said, Caleb, I appreciate your prayer, not because you just prayed for me. And then he said, but they probably wouldn't let you do that at Memphis. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I don't even I said, let me say the prayer? No.
Yeah.
And he said, no. He said, you prayed for Wesley.
Yeah.
He said, you didn't pray for Brother Simons, to his credit. So, look, these are Christians. They're pieces of paper. They're titles, whatnot. I'm a Christian. You're a Christian. You're a Bible student. I'm a Bible student. Look, this is an even playing field. But someone's going to say, what makes y'all think that you get to even have this role? And here's my thing. Someone has to have a catalog of history. Y'all don't know what you're talking about. Some of you do, but there is a handful of people. What's the consistent answer when we say names?
When we say names, you're talking about the names that we know or what?
Anything. Do you know what this, I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
I've never heard of him.
Yeah.
Well, he's got this really popular, I had never read that book. When we went to Focal Point, Mac Deaver's grandson was in the congregation.
Oh, yeah.
And I just said in passing, I said, do y'all know that this is Mac Deaver's grandson? And whoever the youth minister, I think his name was Trent Kennedy.
Yeah.
He said, I don't even know who Mac is. I don't know what Mac teaches. And it's like, Portland Lectures just had a whole lecture on the Holy Spirit, and everybody was talking about Mac. I was.
Yeah.
So you're going to have someone who has a catalog of history, okay?
I can't believe you didn't know who Mac Deaver was when he taught. Jerry Moffat's brother was an elder at San Marcos, and Jerry Moffat's at Portland. He debated Mac Deaver.
Yeah, well, you don't have to know that stuff to be a youth minister. So, no. Someone has to have a catalog of history. And it's not just a catalog of history. Someone has to have their own history of action. So, people probably would not know about you, and that would maybe be in the 90s, early 2000s. So, you got to speak on the Tennessee Bible College lectureship. And was that when you said people didn't really like it?
That's right.
And
actually, as much as Malcolm Hill and I have good relationship in the past, he did not like it because I actually questioned what he said about the splits in the 1900s, 1906. I actually documented that in 1906 to 1930, the church grew just exponentially as a result of the split. He was bemoaning all the things that happened. It's just like some of these things actually happen for a good thing.
And so you get done, and one teacher gets up behind you and gives you a thumbs up.
Yeah, co-director, Glenn Ramsey.
Okay. And his statement was?
I don't mind hearing it from somebody who's doing it.
There you go. Glenn Ramsey said, I don't mind hearing it from somebody who's doing it. Someone has to have a catalog of the history, and someone has to have their own track record of action. And Glenn Ramsey said, I don't mind hearing it from Johnny, because he's doing it. Now, here we are, 2 Corinthians 11, verse number 1. Paul says, would to God you could bear with me a little of my folly. So, as we talk to you about partyism, I want no part of it. And I'm not trying to create a party. I don't want young guys to pledge their allegiance to me. I don't have to, let me say it this way too. I don't have to have old guys say, good job. Mm-hmm. I have been complimented by some of my favorite old men. I'm done with that.
Yeah.
Like Jerry Moffatt, he told me, he said, if I could get a debate camp coming in the summer, could you come teach in it? Mm. I love Jerry. I had read almost all of Jerry's books by the time I had met him. And then John Shannon. These are some of the older men who I really, really appreciate, and both of them complimented me. So that kind of did it as far as older men goes. This is not what we're doing. We're not wanting people to pat us on the back. We're just wanting some action here. Look, y'all are headed in a bad direction. Take some action. It has to be said. Now, someone might say, I reference TBC lectureship, and someone says, this is just like Johnny Robertson, who's obviously the dad. I'm young, I want in. Right, let me make my entrance. You have never been loyal to a party.
No. Or my school.
Not your school, not supporters. There has not been like an entity where you pledge your allegiance, your principles, your conviction, the information you're working with at the time. Like this is, you got me in a bind.
Yeah.
So this is the stuff that, some people are not going to give it to you because it's me talking and I'm talking to you and you're my dad. But if it was someone else, it would matter. So this is the 1988, this is the Memphis paper called The Yoke Fellow. And obviously you and John are there. So why are you pictured in The Yoke Fellow?
they're having their first ever in-house presentation to students or prospective students that are coming. They're celebrating this 10,000 square foot addition onto the school, and it allows them to have big banquets and whatnot. And so I'm actually a student, and they chose 6 students to represent the school. And so all these individuals are prospective students, and they chose me to be one of the persons to give a lesson in front of all these individuals, that have come, brought people to come see if they want to go to school. They invited me to come back as well. I chose not to.
After you had finished?
After I'd finished school, I was back in an area where we had done a 2-week tent meeting. Memphis School of Preaching came and knocked doors during the tent meeting. That would be John Shannon came to do the tent meeting. Rod Rutherford brought the entire student body down to do door knocking. They asked me again, and I just declined.
Yeah.
It's like, number one, I did not like the atmosphere that created in my mind. The idea of, you're being put forward, you're an example. I did not feel that way, and not to mention the fact that, I had some issues with Memphis School of Preaching while I was there. Is it just I preached in a local congregation, and it was a constant battle. Some people would say, well, it's a tightrope. It wasn't a tightrope for me.
Yeah.
They were not telling me what to do.
Right, and they certainly were trying, because
yes, absolutely.
It was Bell's marriage divorce doctrine.
Right.
What's it called? Correlate?
Yeah, correlate.
And so someone is in there who's already getting Bell's doctrine stirred, and when you basically stir back, what does Curtis Cates say?
Well, they had already told the students not to be involved in any kind of friction with Bell's doctrine. Keith Mosier had taken care of it. So I'm over, just miles from South Haven, and while I was gone during the holidays, they invited a gentleman from another congregation that is a Bell's doctrine promoter.
Yeah.
So he's in the pulpit where I'm preaching. I come back and I stand up against it and say, no, there's no way y'all going to have somebody that's promoting Bell's doctrine in my absence. And so it gets back to the school, and Curtis just calls me in and said, didn't I tell you not to be involved in that? Brother Mosier's handling that. And I just, let him know. I'm working in a local congregation here, and you do not tell me what to do. And so if it had not been for my association with Mac Deaver, I would have a lot of trouble. As soon as that got back to them, as soon as I told them what was happening to me, he said, you can leave Middle School of Preaching, come to Southwest School of Preaching. We'd be glad to have you. Upon that information getting back to Curtis, I'm like, okay, Brother Robertson.
And so you leave the school, quote, with good terms.
Certainly.
But the way that you said that, I was having problems at Memphis my first year, and Bob Stapleton was telling me I could come over to Brown Trail, and he was telling you, Caleb won't have to put up with that junk.
Yeah.
We're not doing that stuff here. So, this is my moment where I'm saying he's never been loyal to the school. I got put out of both schools that I went to. He left on good terms, was invited back to, talk to potential students. And you said, no, thank you. But still, like you said, even after saying no, thank you, Rod Rutherford brings the student body to a tent meeting.
And one of the other reasons, too, Caleb, I was extremely busy doing evangelism, which is my loyalty.
Right.
If I can do something for the school, it's to do the best I can with what they gave me.
Right.
And so,
absolutely. That should be.
Yes.
If you're saying I'm a product,
yes,
this is what I did in local work. Well, that moment I did want to say, too, about how does that sound for autonomy? There's the Correlate congregation, then there's Curtis Cates, who just thinks he can tell congregations what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Keith Mosier is handling this, across the board of the Memphis, Arkansas area. That's not autonomy.
No.
That's like Pope of Memphis. And it's partyism. So you mentioned Mac Deaver. You said, I get called in. He says, I thought I told you. And you said, if it weren't for my connection to Mac. So I have to say, the same way people are going to be whatever because you're my dad. Yeah, people don't have a clue about your story. And you don't tell your story. So how are they going to know? You went in to the Memphis School of Preaching and came out. Here is my dad's 1990?
91, 90, 91.
Okay.
I was raising funds to go overseas.
Yeah, so here's his resume with a list of references, and I can zoom in. You left out of Memphis with Jim Dearman, Rod Rutherford, Curtis Cates, Johnny Ramsey, Goebel Music, and Mac Deaver.
I went in with those three prior to going to Memphis.
Which three?
Mac Deaver, Goebel Music, Johnny Ramsey.
Yeah.
And I came out still having them plus Rod Rutherford, Curtis Cates, and Jim Dearman.
So,
And by the way, when I left the Pacific, Jim Dearman and Rod Rutherford wrote to the congregation that sent me to the Pacific and said, we're not going to be involved with y'all either. We're withdrawing our...
Man.
They were both on lectureship, world missions
Right.
lectureship, and they withdrew themselves to great...
Forest Park.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you can't like just thumb your nose.
No. And I'm saying I have the letters from them to prove that.
Yeah.
To Forest Park.
Letters, postcards from Goebel, Mac. And so here's a moment too. Curtis Cates, let me do it again. Jim Dearman, he's Truth for the World.
Yeah.
Truth for the World. Rod Rutherford, World Missions. Tanzania or where? Tasmania.
Tasmania. Yeah.
You go anywhere else?
Yeah, Africa.
So Rod Rutherford, World Missions. No one will ever take away World Missions from someone who does it, right? Like it's someone can say Rod Rutherford has gotten old, blah blah blah. No one will ever take World Missions from Rod Rutherford. God bless him. Curtis Cates, Johnny Ramsey, Goebel Music, Mac Deaver. Now here's the thing that people who just don't keep up. Mac Deaver's on my list.
Yeah.
I would love to talk to Mac Deaver. Mac Deaver was notorious for splitting a congregation, so it's like, don't we need that? Because everybody's, quote, going to church and they're miserable, and they got the lukewarm chaff in there with the wheat, and, you know, Mac just come in, tell you what Oklahoma Christian is doing, telling you what Abilene Christian's doing, what Carol Osborne's doing. Split it. Y'all want to go?
The congregation where I come from.
Yeah.
I just...
Goebel Music.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Goebel Music come and he present, and that's another thing. Ira Rice is not on this list, but Goebel Music would present fellowship problems, and he would tell them, "Don't talk trash when I leave. Come to my hotel and see me." When Ira Rice would go places, he'd be in that van. He'd have all of his files in a van. "Don't be talking trash when I leave. Come out to my van, and I'll show you all my files." This is like hard knocks, right? This is the stuff that people hearken back to. You went into school with it, you left out of school with it, and now it's like, you know, somehow you're just this oddball. We can't figure out how you even did anything, right? But it's like you go in with these. Now, you basically shed some light on this. Did anybody in this list keep fellowship with each other?
Mac and Goebel kept fellowship with each other. Curtis split up from them later on. Holy Spirit issue. Johnny Ramsey. I think they were, for a good long time with Johnny Ramsey. But when Johnny Ramsey died, he was still, very friendly with me, and he and his wife both supported me financially when I was overseas and in the United States. And so
that was Johnny Ramsey.
Johnny Ramsey, yeah.
And then
I got the job in Collinsville, Virginia, because of Rod Rutherford.
Right. So I think
Jim Dearman held our first meeting at Collinsville.
So I think it matters. Like someone watches and they say, I didn't like when you and your dad got on and you talked about all these people. You're sitting in the classroom at Memphis. Are they talking trash about Rod?
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
matter of fact, Rod was given a really hard time because, he didn't have the same credentials that Curtis and Keith had. So when they're talking about the Deuteronomy lectureships, they ended up saying, we think Rod and Jim can handle this. They don't have their master's degree.
Yeah. So I heard that stuff too in the schools. Don't give me the stuff about we're all loving and have fellowship. Y'all are vicious.
Yeah.
And again, Curtis Cates had a higher degree. Did he do world missions like Rod?
No.
So what are we doing here?
And the reason they actually ended up leaving, the catalyst behind them leaving, is because they were actually bringing the fund situation associated with the video part of the school was becoming cumbersome. And so they ended up breaking away from F School of Preaching and going over to Olive Branch.
So you leave with all of these, recommendations, which are, you'll see any of these names in lectureship books. But you leave, and in 1991, Bill Lockwood sends you a letter, and he tells you, "Dear Johnny, I want to drop you a line to ask your help in an upcoming paper. It is still under wraps until the first of the year, but I wanted to know if you'd be interested in assigning on the staff." And included as well as a copy of a letter. And then he goes on to say, I don't even know what he's talking about when he says, "I love your little paper." Johnny, I love your little paper. I like your practical wisdom and countrified style.
Newsletter.
Right,
what it was.
Evangelistic newsletter. So you get done, and now someone might say, I don't know who Bill Lockwood is. Bill Lockwood and Steve Wiggins, they were staff writers for Ira Rice's paper called Contending for the Faith. They both got included and brought on in the same edition. Ira Rice brings on Bill Lockwood, Steve Wiggins. Bill Lockwood, Steve Wiggins, they go off on their own and they start their own paper called Hammer and Tongs, which was primarily to do Holy Spirit stuff, and that's where they had their debate with the Devers. So you leave out with good recommendation. You're going to do Pacific Island mission work. People are asking you to be in their papers. You did contribute, like I have a lot of the Hammer and Tongs now, and you contribute a number to that. And it's not just that. You can get on Seek the Old Paths, which is Garland Robinson's paper, and I don't know where they were always stationed. He's like in
Corinth, Mississippi, back in those days,
Okay.
always, yeah.
So Corinth, Mississippi. Now he's in the
No clue.
well, he's in that area.
Cookville area.
Yeah, he's in the Cookville area. And so here is an article by you, 1993, A Conversation with Larry West. So here's my thing. Someone says, what gives Johnny the right to talk to us this way? Glenn Ramsey. I don't mind hearing it from somebody who's doing it. From 1993 to 2023, you've always been doing this. Not loyal to a party, not loyal to a paper, and, you know, this was affecting your role in the Pacific Island work. Larry West, We Care campaigns. And
But actually, as we were going to the Pacific, I did not realize it, but the congregation that I chose to receive my funds, they were going to have Larry West. I got there, moved there, and I realized, you know, I'm living next door to the building, and I go over to a meeting that they're having, and I realize Larry West. I'm from the area of Whites Ferry Road. I know Larry West very well, and I realize they're going to have a We Care campaign with this guy, and I get in there and hear, and they're saying, you know, don't be talking about anything to do with doctrine. Just talk about the gospel, just death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and the church can teach them later on this kind of thing. And so we're fighting it for the whole time that I'm raising funds. I have to raise like $350,000 to stay my 6-year stint. And so I'm trying very hard to do this, and Guy Dickinson and Malcolm Hill are hugely involved in this. So it doesn't get done. Mm-hmm. It's the next year. They're supposed to have him in April. I leave in January. And I left the elders. I basically gave them a letter as I get on the plane. And it basically said, if you have Larry West, I'm coming home.
Right.
And so they didn't have Larry West, but it ended up being that once I got to the Pacific, they were making the same mistakes in the Pacific that they were making at home. Just, you know, 8,000 miles away. You've got guys on Winterfest. You've got guys that are at Jubilee that are coming out to the Pacific.
Yeah. And so this is just a side note. When guys get out to the Pacific, how do they preach?
Oh man, if you're going to the Pacific, you'd think Paul had arrived.
Yeah. How do they preach when they're back home?
Not at all. Don't mention names. Nobody calls denominational names, and man, they're just getting with it when they get out in the Pacific.
And so I want to make a note too about this for Larry West. So you have Pacific Island coworkers. I don't know the timeline always, but were you in with your coworkers at that point when you're having to challenge Larry West?
Yes.
Were they upset with you about stirring the pot?
No. Actually, the guy that was the preacher at Forest Park was recommended by Robert Martin, and he was a graduate of Whites Ferry Road. Mm-hmm. So that's how Larry West got in. Right. And Robert was very gracious about it. Mm. You know, it's like I didn't know that kind of stuff, and so no, we got off really well. And Randy English, he's still out there. Robert's, still working out in the Pacific. Randy English went to Heritage, which was IBC back then. Randy was gracious about it too. I don't know these kind of things. What in the world is going on? And so I come out like that, and it ended up being that Randy had the people that were going to Jubilee and Winterfest, and the elders were letting it happen. Yeah. And when I started ringing the bell, I was fighting that stuff back at home. When I would go into places, one of the places outside of Cookville, they were going to Winterfest. And the elders ended up saying, come back over here.
Yeah, Winterfest is Jeff Walling's event.
Yeah. And so they were saying, why are you complaining about this? And so they ended up having me come back and meet with all the elders and the preacher and tell us why we shouldn't be going to Winterfest and Jubilee.
So essentially what he just said was, you try,
someone
gives you an audience.
That's right.
You shoot your shot.
That's right. So, and they supported me, even after that.
Yeah. So were the elders been out of shape about you bringing it up, or did they?
Oh, yeah.
They were?
Yes. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we ended up, I ended up having to come home 2 years later, and the elders were still talking about the fact that I had given them a letter, and the letter is that letter. And that letter ended up stopping the meeting at Foot Street. I didn't know this until lately. You ended up telling me this as a result of your connections with Foot Street. That letter stopped their meeting with Larry West. But the elder said, we read the letter and you're getting on the plane. Why didn't you? And I'm like, I was in here trying to get y'all to see this. And one of the elders telling me, I don't want to hear nothing else from Malcolm Hill. We're doing this. And they ended up forfeiting $10,000, not having the We Care campaign.
Yeah,
so
because when you have Larry West We Care campaign, it's not just all of his funds. It's like you have to buy his packaging.
Right. It was $100,000 for the congregations that were all in the greater Atlanta area.
So when you said that, one of them said, I don't want to hear anything else about Malcolm Hill. Again, that's that moment where I say, like, if you're at Memphis and Memphis staff is making fun of Rod Rutherford, don't give me this business about we all love each other.
Yeah.
And if you're like coming down to a point where you're just saying, I don't want to hear anything about Malcolm Hill, you got a problem with Malcolm Hill. So they get bent out of shape. And what does Larry West say?
Larry West says, I know you love me.
To Larry West credit.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, how we all ought to be.
Yeah.
We find ourselves disagreeing. Maybe we're finding ourselves where we can't do this work together. But if you took the initiative, Larry West comes away and says, well, I know Johnny Robertson loves me.
Well, they should give me a good, some kind of good recommendation at Forest Park, too, because I did not come home and write out packets and all that kind of stuff. I came home, re-raised all my funds, and went back to the Pacific within a year.
And so I have to say, you will say I re-raised my funds. There's really no way to communicate that to somebody who's
there was
never done it.
48 congregations that were all the way from Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, back down to all over Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, West Virginia. I had to visit every one of them. And then under this cloud, you don't come back from a mission field in the middle of your tour and tell all of them that you had to come home. And I have the letters, from the congregations that what Forest Park sent out to them.
Yeah.
We're not receiving funds for Johnny anymore. He doesn't have confidence in us anymore. That's a big hurdle to have to deal with, when you are in the environment we're in. Winterfest and stuff like that is going on. And you've got people in all of these congregations that are having these issues. Mm-hmm. And you come back and you are leaving a work because you can't fellowship these people in the Pacific.
So
many of them rewarded me big time.
And again, that's where we say you take your chance.
Yeah, you take your chance. And Rod Rutherford told me early on, one of the hardest things you'll ever do if you have to do it is re-raise your funds.
Wow. Again, God bless Rod giving you tips along the way. So one thing I think that young guys, when they just heard you say all that, was, who wants to sign up to do that? Like, that was so much work. I got to do all this work just to go out to a third world country and do more work.
Yeah.
And they would say, it sounds like it's a hard row. And I would say to the young guys, no, like, I'm not saying it wasn't hard.
Yes.
But I'm saying the hard row is to be stuck in a third world country fighting your conscience.
Yeah.
Which is where you would have been.
That's exactly.
And you did have ulcers.
Yeah.
So it's like you were working on your conscience. You don't want to do that. And you listen to the Rubel Shelly, he says, the interview, he says, there are worse things than being fired. And it would be losing your integrity. So I'm doing this right now for my conscience. I can't keep participating in a system riddled with inconsistencies where they just crucify one man because he's charismatic, So me and my conscience.
For a plug for the interview, what we're saying here is nothing compared to this, what Rubel Shelly is going to say and the things that he did for his integrity. I'm saying the first rattle, is it really?
It's right out the gate.
It's right out the gate. It's one of the most endearing, encouraging, unbelievable accounts of a young guy who didn't have anybody on his side. Back then, his daddy was not a preacher.
Right.
He didn't have all of these accolades. He didn't have a Mac Deaver, a Goebel Music, a Johnny Ramsey, a Curtis Cates in his resume.
Right.
This was a young guy, 2 years,
Who just
1 year.
excelled.
And I'm saying when we were saying that first story, he wasn't excelling back then. That was the beginning.
Right.
Centerville, Tennessee?
Well, even before that, I don't know.
No, I'm saying that's where he came from, isn't it?
Oh,
Middle Tennessee. Yeah, Middleton, Tennessee. And you're over here in Mississippi, and the story is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Watch the interview.
Yes. So, and, I have to tell his story so that it makes sense of when you start seeing him get just tore to pieces.
Yeah.
So, one more, if I can go backwards to this one, they select you. Was John doing that too?
Yes.
Okay. So they select you and John to talk to potential students, incoming students. You leave the school with Jim Dearman, Rod Rutherford, Curtis Cates, Johnny Ramsey, Goebel Music, Mac Deaver, all as your recommendations, references. You're being asked to participate in papers. Here's the next one. This one's big. So you go in. Now, did he do that for you? This is Malcolm Hill. He's the founder of the Tennessee Bible College.
He's also the founder of IBC.
Yes. So then there's a whole story
Yeah.
with that and
Yeah.
the Pacific work.
And that happens to be Heritage University now. He
Yes.
was the founder of
Was it
IBC.
Was it ever called Montgomery?
No.
Okay, that's my confusion.
Yeah.
So IBC, Tennessee Bible College, which is in the Cookeville area. This is Malcolm Hill. Malcolm Hill has a book called My God and My Neighbor. It's an evangelistic book, and Malcolm Hill wasn't a very evangelistic man, and he had this dream that he wanted to do where he said, I want to go help participate something going up and down the Eastern Seaboard,
Yeah.
establishing congregations, because Virginia and the Eastern Seaboard is not like Alabama, Tennessee, Texas,
yeah.
Arkansas. So here's Malcolm Hill, founder of the Tennessee Bible College. And so did he do that for you when you were re-raising to
No,
go to
when I
Pacific?
started.
When
Yeah,
you started,
when I started,
okay.
yeah.
So you go in and you tell Malcolm, I'm raising funds for the Pacific Island mission work, and what does he do for you?
He basically is very knowledgeable of it because Malcolm actually was in the beginning. He actually was the preacher when they started the Forest Park congregation.
Yes.
So very evangelistic, 100 people obeying the gospel in those days. And so he basically, and I have to tell him this story. You know, I told him that the Memphis School of Preaching would not let me raise any funds from any of their alumni. They wouldn't. I gave a presentation and people were going to give me money out of the Memphis School of Preaching.
Yeah.
And they made me, I mean, out of the old congregation,
Knight Arnold.
Knight Arnold congregation, had to give it back. They said, Brother Robertson, we don't let students take money from the congregation. I'm like, I didn't go to the congregation.
Let's pause on that. We don't let students get funding to do world missions
That's right.
out of Knight Arnold.
That's right.
Okay.
The preacher at Knight Arnold's wife was going to send money to me, and the former preacher, whose name was E.L. Whitaker, his sister was going to give me money. They had already committed. She actually come out to the Pacific ultimately. They said, no, you can't take money. I tell Malcolm that, and he said, Brother Robertson, he said, you know, I'm calling him Malcolm. He called me Johnny. He didn't call me Brother Robertson. He just called me Johnny. He said, if God is blessing me with all of these supporters around here, how in the world could I shut up the windows of heaven against you and expect that God's going to bless me? He wrote 100 letters to all the congregations around that area.
Yeah.
And he said, if they don't like me, then,
you don't have to take up.
That's right.
Yeah.
You don't have to take up for me. And, so I got a huge portion. Stayed in Cookeville for 3 months in a congregation in a hotel that Malcolm actually went over, and said, this is a congregation, this is a hotel where our people stay on a regular basis, like $12 a night. So just tremendous help.
And so anybody who's kept up, I want to say, like, this is our manner of thinking. You have to make stands at particular times. So someone might know the story and they say, well, years down the road, you end up getting cross with Malcolm over Mac Deaver. That doesn't stop you from saying, God bless Malcolm Hill.
Yeah, there's just really no way to factor in the help that Malcolm was.
It's unfortunate, right, that with the whole Mac Deaver situation and baptism of the Holy Ghost, you go and you have conversation, and that's another one of those moments where you try to come in, and so, but it doesn't take away that he helped you raise those funds, put himself out there, just say, if they like me, they might help you. If they don't like me, don't feel like you have to take up for me. But it's not just Malcolm. You have that, and then also Glenn Ramsey gave you that good plug. It's the man in the middle. That's Guy Dickinson. And Guy Dickinson was the chairman of the board when Tennessee Bible College was started. And there y'all are. Just consistently, recently the statement was, they said, Drew Milligan said there's a small fringe group.
Vocal.
A small but vocal fringe group. And it's like, no, you're just not loyal to parties is what the problem is.
Yeah.
Because you have had good relations just across the board to have those recommendations, and then this is the one. So, like you said, Malcolm was the preacher at Forest Park, and then he's over at Tennessee Bible College. He's working with you as you are going through Forest Park to get to the Pacific. And so Guy Dickinson did union work. He's a wealthy man.
Yeah.
He's a super evangelistic man. He supported you.
He was a charter member at Forest Park also, and when they split, when they let me go, he stayed with me.
Right.
And so when I come back and, kind of have friction with Malcolm later on over Mac, he is the chairman of the board at that point. He pulled out at the same time I did.
Right. So you take these sensible players, and he basically hears your state with Forest Park, and he says, well, I'm not going for that.
Yeah.
And he starts hearing what's going on at Tennessee Bible College with Mac Deaver, and Mac Deaver
was there.
Yeah, he was there. Can I make a statement too for myself? If I can just tell that story really quickly.
Yeah.
So my dad just puts me in the car one day. Do you have an idea what year that was?
Like maybe 2000, maybe 2001.
I'm not even 10 years old
Yeah.
yet then. So my dad just puts me in the car and says, you want to go golfing? And I say, yeah. So we get in the car. And we're in the car forever. We're going to Cookeville, Tennessee. Tennessee Bible College always has the golf scramble. So he tells me we're going golfing. We do play golf. We play golf so horribly we don't finish the whole round. And then at night, we're at Tennessee Bible College. I don't have a clue what's going on. But I'm in the lobby as you're handing the papers to Malcolm Hill. That is Mac Deaver telling, was it Brant?
Yes.
Mac Deaver's telling Brant Stubblefield, I will debate you on baptism of the Holy Ghost. And you're saying to Malcolm Hill, there's no way you can deny it. He's out here challenging people to debates. Guy Dickinson is in the foyer. I'm in the foyer. One of their Asian students was in the foyer. That's my childhood. Randomly showing up to Tennessee Bible College to talk to people, to challenge people that you have great appreciation for. None of it is personal.
Yeah.
And so, that's what I was raised with, and that's how I feel now. I can have that phone call with Wesley. I wouldn't mind hearing from, I basically say I'm only going to hear from Wesley when he's been out of shape.
Well, too, Caleb, with that, you never really know who is going to do what. And so there's Guy Dickinson. He's a chairman of the board. And he pulls out, and he basically tells Malcolm, he said, you've changed. And David Hill, Malcolm's son, his wife, her dad's name is Red Pate. Red Pate never stopped supporting me. And I'm saying his daughter is married to Malcolm's son, David.
So when you say never stop.
He supported me until his death, $400 a month. And the congregation where his widow is still supports me. That's where Scott Harp's dad is. And it just like, you never know who's going to rally.
Yeah, so sometimes it is a lot. Are Scott Harp and Guy Dickinson somehow related?
No, Scott's daddy is preaching there where where Guy Dickinson's niece
But
is.
you kept good relationship with Richard
Yes.
Harp. So
Yeah.
all around, it's just, these are principles, these are convictions, and they're put into action. And I do have to say, some people are just not equipped to participate. It might be their own fault. They might not have had, like I'm talking about the directors now.
Yeah.
School directors right now, they are not equipped at participating.
Well, the idea of fellowship, too, is not in their repertoire whatsoever because they're fundraisers. Back then, it was, and just for Richard Harp's the one who gave me the outline for ABCD in fellowship, which answered Curtis Cates, and Curtis Cates actually said, I realize that this is right. I shouldn't be fellowshipping Mac Line without doing something. Richard Harp's the one that did that, gave me that, and the reason why is because he was involved with the same thing in the Pacific himself, he and his son Scott. So he is Robert Martin's brother-in-law.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, he's Robert Martin's brother-in-law, and Robert wasn't opposing me, but he didn't have the wherewithal to help me like Richard did.
Yeah.
And that was tremendous, that information to help a young preacher along the way.
So, good credit to Richard Harp and Robert Martin in his own way. That's a big deal. Chairman of the board, Tennessee Bible College. This is our final segment. Fringe group. Well, like I said, Jason Raleigh says, we need to talk to Rubel Shelly. So I do it. I go and I talk to him. 2-hour-long interview. And I do that. We have established you've never been a party man. You have had relations with a lot of these people, but you're just not going to do the party line. There's a third aspect to, you're not going to be able to call us partyists, right? And so here it is. What happened? It wasn't always just, someone, you were at St. Augustine, I think, and they pulled up and there were Virginia tags. And Steve Wiggins pulls up and says something about, if I see Virginia tags, it's Johnny Robertson. It's not just this idea of, at some point in time, Johnny Robertson's going to make his way and we're going to see him at Bible class one night. Y'all came to Virginia. Did you come to be with a French group? No. So on the screen, I'm saying, why this idea that y'all are putting on Dad and me, and I get it, like I'm 29, I'm going to turn 30 in a couple days. Where did this idea come from? Because Brent Stubblefield and Steve Wiggins were thrilled to death to be on What Does the Bible Say? Right? And it's like me and my brother Micah, when we went to Memphis School of Preaching, there would be guys who would walk around, and when they'd see us walking, they go, "What does the Bible say? What does the Bible say? Johnny Robertson." And it's like, they didn't feel bad. Mm-mm. Students didn't. And how is it, and let me say it this way too, Brent didn't just come. They brought 2 15-passenger buses from Lindsay, Oklahoma. So if we're all being honest, from the 90s to the early 2000s to now, Johnny Robertson hasn't changed. Right. So how is it that Brant came in the early 2000s and it's fringe now, but it wasn't back then? Yeah. Same thing for Steve Wiggins.
And Steve, just to give you the idea of the enjoyment, Steve gets out on the side of the road with a sign that says, it's what is the emoji for don't do it? No way, it's a red.
Yeah.
So he gets out and they project the sign onto Jackie Poe, onto his sign out there at on 220 going out by the racetrack. And Charles comes out and he's basically participating in that. He ends up telling, after this segment here on What Does the Bible Say? He tells me to tell Steve Wiggins, you can come back and I'll put y'all on TV for free. That's the impact that kind of stuff had.
So he's doing that with Jackie Poe.
Yeah.
Brant Stubblefield was going with you to Bishop Kellum's house.
Right.
And videotaping them driving the Rolls Royce on the road.
Right.
So this is where we have to ask, does Brant act that way in Oklahoma?
Goes up to Benny Dodson's place, videos him.
Yeah.
J.C. Richardson.
Right.
All of these guys.
So was it friend? And look, this is not a moment to, I'm not trying to beat up.
Yeah.
It's like, I love them.
Yep.
And so, but you got to ask those questions. Do you press Pentecostals that way at home? Do you put them on TV at home? Same thing for Steve Wiggins. That's young man, younger than them. That's Cody Westbrook. Cody Westbrook has been here, more than once.
Yeah.
I drove to Charlotte, North Carolina to pick him up from the airport, bring him back. He's preaching under the tent. He's going on television. Was he coming to a fringe group? No. And it's like, no.
Congregation where he grew up was supporting me.
Is that
Fruitvale.
Yeah, Fruitvale, Texas. Yeah. So, and that's Carl McCann.
Yeah. And elders supported me. James Oldfield was getting support from there, so I don't go into congregations where James generally was. And I told them, that's my policy. They said, we don't care what your policy is. We want you to come. And they began supporting me $500 a month. And then they had other individuals that had they were in charge of a gas lease that somebody had died and left them. I can't even tell you the thousands of dollars that they were actually helping. That's why Cody was here.
Yeah. Do they still help?
No. That's not anything that a problem or whatever. It's just, it's...
That's just a question.
Yeah.
And like I say, I don't have a problem saying to people's credit. And if people have a moment where they say they can't do it.
Yeah, elders died. Yeah. One of the elders died that was really in for us, and so the gas lease probably maybe played out or whatever.
And I've had people do that. They call me and they say, it's nothing. We just can't do it. Yeah. And I hear you. This is an elder from Howell, Texas, Steve Bookout. He was here. Is that correct?
Yes.
He's here for the Danville tent meeting, and he's actually being interviewed by the news. Were you coming to Fringe Group? Has the news come and interviewed the elders at the Howell Church of Christ?
No. And they would never, the situation that prompted this is all the dignitaries in the city, the zoning, the manager, the fire chief, not the manager, but the person who gives you a building permit, which basically is our tent permit. They're all out there at one time.
Yeah.
And Charles is, he's all up in it, and we take them to TV, and we put them all on the spot, and they, it made them really look bad. They shut our tent down the first night, and there's Travis. Charles comes up and says,
Steve. Is it Steve or Travis?
Travis is his son, yeah.
Okay.
Steve, yes. There's Steve, and Charles says, what do you think about this? This kind of uproar and whatever. And he said, if Johnny's involved in it, we're fine with it.
Yeah.
No, they're not going to do that at Howe.
No. And I preached at Howe, and not knowing that they had fired Michael Wyatt.
Yeah.
And I made reference to Michael Wyatt's son had publicly said Tim Tebow could go to heaven off of his Baptist baptism. And I'm in Howe, and I don't know their connection to Michael Wyatt, but I bring that up, and I said, this is the type of stuff that's coming out of Freed Hardman.
Yeah.
He's out here telling people to respect Tim Tebow's Baptist baptism.
And you're raising money, and your lesson is toe the line?
Hold the line.
Hold the line.
Yeah, I said the line is falling. And so when I get done, one of the other elders who's not him pulls me aside, and he says, you opened up a lot of wounds today. And I'm like, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. And that was Mr. Savage.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. But the statement here, when you're on the news in Martinsville, Virginia, if Johnny's for it, I'm okay with it.
And the reason Michael ended up having to leave
Yeah.
is Michael was getting after the Baptists in the newspaper, and the Baptists were actually taking his articles and bringing it into class and trying to answer it, and it was causing friction with the members at Howe.
Yeah.
And it's like, you got to go.
And that's where I come in and I say,
Yeah.
young guys.
Yeah.
I had one of my classmates. He said, I just thought preaching was you moved every 2 years. And he said, I was getting ready to do it.
Yeah.
Here's one. I don't think that they would come back. Cody.
No way.
Brant, Steve Wiggins. I don't know. Here's one down at the bottom. Brad Harrod. I tagged Brad tonight on Facebook, and I said, Brad Harrod's going to be on What Does the Bible Say? And he said, always happy. So he'd come back.
Yeah.
And this is Brad. He came to Virginia, and you guys challenged the brand new Natural History Museum. They're going to give you a guided tour to teach you evolution, and then you show up and you say, well, we actually have our own PhD. He's going to teach the creation viewpoint. And they shut the whole...
News showed up.
News showed up.
And the news asked Brad, he said, Brad, did you shut down the Natural History Museum? And it's like, this is like a $20 million entity that was getting off the ground. And he's like,
that was
did
their
you
opening.
shut it down? And it's like, it was Brad Harrod.
Yeah.
The fact that he had his PhD and they were not going to be able to answer him as we went through with this homeschool,
Right.
Henry County homeschool group.
Did Brad say, like when you pitched the idea, he said, I've never thought of just going
No,
through.
he said that later.
Okay.
Yeah, after it's all said and done, it was maybe some time, he's like, man, going to the Natural History Museum in a town.
Yeah.
Who thought it?
Now, here's the next one, and we've got more.
And he came back to debate our resident atheist in
Yes.
town, Larry Serber.
He came back after the museum,
Yeah.
and I watched him debate the atheist while I was at Memphis. Here's the next one. That's Drew Leonard. He was my roommate for all 3 years of preaching school. I have no contact with him. I could call him and he'll answer the phone. He can call me, I'll answer the phone, but we don't have a good relationship.
I'm fairly certain when he left Memphis, I helped him either get $10,000 or $15,000 of his support.
From Tin Top Road,
Richard Massey.
Weatherford, Texas.
Yeah.
So Drew left Memphis. You helped him with Richard Massey. Richard Massey at the time did not want to support Memphis.
Right, he'd already turned him down because he went to Memphis.
And now they are with Memphis.
Yeah.
So that was some weather politics. But Drew came to a tent. He preached under the tent. Drew has hosted What Does the Bible Say with me. And so we're looking at all these people and we say, I don't know what Drew would say. I'm not going to speak for him. But it's like, when I arrived to Memphis, he had our roommate wake him up so that he could meet me. And guys I went to school with, I was bad to Drew. I was not a good roommate. And it took us about 6 months to become friends, and it was my fault. But he had watched all your videos before he came to school. And I'll say, too, while we're just having this conversation, Drew got a really bad deal at Memphis. Drew came from an area of Missouri, and where he came from, Bill Goring was always giving fellowship problems. And Drew really appreciated Garland Elkins. And so Bill Goring showed up for the Memphis lectures, and he put his hand out to shake Drew's hand. Drew wouldn't shake his hand. And so Bill Goring said, well, we'll just have a meeting. So he gets to have a meeting with Garland Elkins and Drew. And Garland Elkins just said, I'm fine with what Bill Goring's got going on back home. And Drew was really deflated.
Yeah.
He really thought that Garland was going to go to bat for the correct position, which is to not eat with withdrawn from family members, which Drew said Bill Goring did.
This is what politics will do for you. On 2 different occasions, Garland Elkins basically stood up for me against the school. One was when we were going to a seminar at the Memphis big Coliseum where the Pentecostals were. Curtis and them said, well, you'll do more damage than you'll do good. He supplied us with the tracts to go and told us stories about what he had done. When the Coral Lake thing really blew up, Garland Elkins was going to be one of the individuals to moderate between the men and me.
Mm-hmm.
They just folded because of Garland Elkins. And so,
And
you know, he gets involved with the Memphis School of Preaching. He's now a teacher, instructor. That's what politics will do.
He does. You're saying Drew teaches?
No, I'm saying Garland was a teacher back then.
Yes.
And so that's what politics will do for you.
He was our teacher.
Yeah,
and so
he should have stood up for Drew.
He should have. The correct position.
Yeah.
The next thing was Barry Grider was forever telling everybody that he was going to have fellowship with his adulterous dad.
Yeah.
And Drew wasn't going to put up with that.
Yeah.
So Drew was pushing back, and Barry just had fits. And so Drew took it to B.J. Clark, who did nothing. And Drew took it to Keith Mosier, and Keith Mosier did not just do nothing. I think it was Christmas break. Drew was walking out the door, and Keith Mosier put his hand on Drew's shoulder and said, I'm okay with Barry. That's when Drew called and said, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And now here we are. You know, it's like he might say that he's not dabbling in it anymore, but I don't feel like I get any help from him.
Yeah.
And I love him, and I send him books.
And I miss him.
I send him books that I put notes in there that I love him. You know, all these men, none of it is wicked. I'm just saying these are the politics. And it's like, if we didn't all have politics, where would we be?
Yeah.
We'd be working together.
And Brad's the one that said anytime. Always
happy to be on
always
the
happy,
Bible study.
yeah.
Very funny. This is Michael Wyatt. My sister sent me this one, and that's me, probably like 13. I'm looking at it like, oh, this is a fantastic picture. Didn't even recognize that was me. But that's Michael Wyatt. And so I make that point about me being a kid. This is Dad and Michael Wyatt. I asked you recently, because I'm a kid there, I don't really remember Michael's preaching, right?
Very good.
And so I asked you recently, I said, can Michael preach to lost people?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I said, I'd love to hear it.
I remember being at Hanley when Michael was preaching, and I asked one of the elders, I said, he always preach like that? And he said, he brings it every Sunday. Very good preacher.
And so, like I had said a moment ago, I don't know what Michael feels like. I had that exchange with his son over the whole Tim Tebow Baptist baptism, and but I don't know. You would have to say we just haven't had any. He has not come back to Virginia to preach. I'll say it that way.
The last time I saw him, though, I visited him in Lebanon,
Mm-hmm.
and Susie was in the hospital. And the time before that, I saw him at a lectureship. He didn't have much to do with you, but he
walked right by me.
Yeah, but he, hugged me, and he took me everywhere he went.
Yeah.
Every congregation he was in, Michael White made sure I got in to raise funds.
God bless him.
Yeah.
To his credit. I'd like to hear some evangelistic preaching. Here's a big one. Now, Scott Gann has health problems. But there's Scott Gann. There's Micah. There's Sam Dilbeck. There's H.D. Simmons. There's James Oldfield. There's Eric Pitcock. And then there's me. There's Dad. There's a former Methodist preacher named Levitus Nunley that you taught. There's James Oldfield. Jason Hairston.
James taught him before I met him.
Which one?
Levitus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
To his credit. And I have to say now, someone said, what you doing with that to his credit?
Yeah.
Like, I want to give people their due.
Yeah.
They do work.
Yeah.
Jason Hairston, he's the young man who said, I'm going to debate you on water baptism, ended up teaching himself out of it.
Yeah.
Then said, if you can prove that sectarianism was wrong, I'll obey the gospel. And he did.
4 years in seminary.
And he hosted What Does the Bible Say? Did a lot.
Excellent job. Debated 2 Episcopalians at the same time.
Yeah. This, of course, is John Shannon. Rick Popejoy, Brant Stubblefield. And then also, I don't have a tent photo with him. One of the first times I ever met Aaron Gallagher was when he came to an Eden, North Carolina tent meeting, went to TV with us, talked with us outside the studio. That's me and Cody McCoy sitting on the stage. Cody came from Cary, North Carolina area to be in the tent meeting with us. And so you put all these people on the screen, and I have it up there. What happened? Because no one thought when they came, well, we're coming to a fringe group. Well, no one said we're coming where they wrote the Radical Handbook. And I want to say it at this point because we have so many on there. someone says, well, what is the common factor to all this? And that's where someone says, well, it's Johnny Robertson. And I would say it's not Johnny Robertson. This was the only place that people could come to be involved in a 2-week tent meeting and host live television. The common factor that drew people, and it was not fringe when they came, was evangelism.
Evangelism. Rick and I have been friends before I went to Pacific. He was in Wellington, Texas, sometime around in there. Could be fuzzy on that. Helped me along, and put me in contact with internet entities where I could read every book that you can imagine for $25 for whatever. I'm saying, and then he was instrumental in getting all of that together to come to Virginia. We ran into him again, and y'all did in Ludington. At another tent meeting, and so I got to come by there as I was leaving the cancer center in Chicago, and so it was. They did 14 tent meetings that year. The year that they came here, he and Brant went back to Lindsay, and they did 14 tent meetings after that.
One thing I think too that people learn is, like when I said it's not fringe when you come, but when people do come, they start saying this is a lot more work than just going to a hotel conference room. It's like heat, door knocking, TV, going to talk to Pentecostal preachers. One more, like Sam Dilbeck, HD. These are my childhood. HD would come into town. I'd set him up with like a portable DVD player in his hotel so he could watch John Wayne movies, And was it Sam? Were his kids making the wristbands?
Yeah, well, Sam and them were just saying it. Yeah, I don't know if they were making the wristbands or not, but it was a common thing with him and Todd Tyler Young. The crowd that went to, I think they all, I can't think that they all went to Southwest, but I know he was taught by David Brown, and the congregation where he was in Leonard supported me in the Pacific. Great friends with he and his wife Julie, and they were doing. I think he went to East Hills after that in Corsicana, and they didn't support me because he said, we just had a split, a bunch of people that social drink and whatever, they left out of here. Probably be 2 or 3 years before I can get you in. But yeah, they were saying, what would Johnny Robertson do?
Which would equate out to WWJDR.
Yeah.
And I'm only saying that like someone said, boy, Caleb really put in like a campaign for you. But I'm saying just good relationships. Yeah. And he may be, like someone says, Caleb thinks he's special to HD. He might have been calling all kinds of little kids Pilgrim. But it was like, Pilgrim, my childhood, raised up around other people's kids.
And he came and did that tent meeting. We didn't pay any of these individuals. They came on their own. They supported themselves while they're here. And not only that, they brought money to help the tent meeting. Yeah. And HD came when I had cancer. And you and Micah ran that tent meeting with the help of all, brethren. Right. And HD's preaching and these brethren. Yeah. Great help.
And that's a moment where someone says, you give everybody credit, but Micah. Dad was away with cancer. I was 16 in that photo behind me. We were just always so close to fighting. I'm 16, so I don't have any sense. But I'm calling you, and you're like on cancer treatment, and I'm just like saying, he's bowing up, and you were saying to me, however you had the sense to say it. You said my 2 cousins, Michael, Don, and Mitchell. You said I only saw him fight once in the warehouse floor. Didn't do anything. Don't do it. And so, yeah, James did not pull his weight in that meeting. Micah is 6 years older than me, so if I'm 16, he's 22. And so, I had small things that I was doing in there, and he did a lot of it with just the men. There were men here that were saying, James Oldfield will do it. He'll step in, he'll do it. He did not. I'm not trying to knock James. And someone says, well, why is it that James quit? James quit, my opinion, over the fellowship stuff. You're raising support. You have to talk to your supporters. You have to give them updates on fellowship, not just the work that you got going on. And I think he got tired of it. One of the big things was he just told us flat out, he said, I'm just not going to do anything about Jason Rowland. Well, we're not doing that. So your thing has always been, you would say, you kind of had to press him into it, but you said James always did a good job when you pressed him into it. So we don't sit up here and stew about James or Micah. Give them their credit. Micah went into Freed Hardeman and got footage with, I can never say that man's name, Tom Childers and
Earl Edwards,
Earl Edwards. And you talked to Milton Sewell.
Yeah.
I said Earl Edwards earlier. We got just a little bit more. If you can bear with us, here's Kevin Pendergrass. Look, it's ridiculous. What happened? Kevin Pendergrass, very good friend. Brandon Johnson helped me raise funds throughout Oklahoma. He got a really bad deal with a bad elder in a congregation that would never withstand the elder, and you can withstand elders. Kevin Pendergrass, he was on support, raised support. He saw all the inconsistencies we're talking about now, just got fed up with it, just left. And they're on. You see that they're on What Does the Bible Say? Kevin, Brandon, here's Wesley Wynn. I do think that Wesley Wynn was favored by a handful of people in the Portland realm, but you know he lived very close to Henderson, Tennessee. We talked fellowship with him, and he just flat out said, "Who am I and what can I do?"
Yeah. Tom Childers had his thumb on Wesley.
Yeah,
and
so Wesley did a good job. I still have people talk to me about some of his lessons he did on Calvinism. Like, you know, they said those some of the best stuff they heard on Born in Sin. That's me, probably 15, Kevin Pendergrass. There's you, David Fanning. David Fanning came from Alabama. He's on What Does the Bible Say? I've seen his lineup that he's doing in his tent meetings. You know, I like that he's out there calling out sectarian division. Yeah. He's going to talk to you about Romanism, Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal.
Let's just let me say, don't have Willie Franklin.
Oh.
Yeah, that's basically when I just started saying I have to hold back. He had Willie Franklin over in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And Willie Franklin's with everybody. Yeah. And so Willie Franklin is well known, very good preacher, mm-hmm. but his fellowship is awful. Yeah. And you just, you're not, I just said to my friends over in that area, you're not going to bring Willie Franklin in and amongst the friends that, the people that I associate with, mm-hmm. And so, if David cleaned that up, great.
This is Tim Wilkes Jr., Bay, Arkansas. I don't know all the ins and outs of Tim Wilkes Sr., but Tim Wilkes Jr. in Bay, Arkansas, they had you come and preach the meeting, and then you brought in Virginia Brethren, and we did all the door knocking. Yeah. And that's actually where Baptist Behaving Badly originated. Yeah. So he was involved. He didn't bring anybody to Virginia. This is me outside of a tent. Holger Neubauer. All of these people, right? And so I just have the problem here. The same thing as he's going to hate it, but Mac Deaver, you said to Mac Deaver, and he didn't like it. Are you just going to let this Holy Spirit feud define you
for the rest of
your life? And here we are, 30 years later. And I think that he wouldn't like me saying that. That's what I feel about Holger. I have been raised knowing Holger Neubauer and his kids, and that's what I think right now.
He was assistant to the president, which is Malcolm Hill,
Tennessee
Bible College, and he ended up leaving, going back to Michigan, South Haven, Michigan, outside of Benton Harbor. Very evangelistic over there. Very evangelistic.
He probably still knocks doors. I just don't know. But I'm saying the idea of having to champion to all of these brethren, and my thing is like, they're not going to do evangelism. That's my thing. You go down and you talk to Daniel Denham or whoever, they're not going to be doing evangelism. You could be doing evangelism. So that's just one of those aspects where we say, what happened? Zoom out. Michael Shepard, been at the tent. That's Steve Bazin. He obviously co-works with Holger Neubauer.
And Michael Shepard is up there at Texas School of Preaching with those guys at the June Young Men's Conference. Mm-hmm. And, these guys are not watching fellowship. No. Because Michael, he can go, he would never have a discussion. When he came here, last time he was here, the fact that he would not discuss the problems with Memphis and him being on the different lectureships, and during that time frame, it was also Tennessee Bible College with Mac Deaver. Yeah. And he just wouldn't, I'm not going to hear it.
When we say they're just not going to look at it, and someone says, well, they don't have to. When you write all these books on fellowship, you have to keep up with it. You don't just say, that was 30 years ago. So, Michael Shepard, Jason Rollo,
And Terrence Dindy, the idea that Jason Rollo wouldn't tell you that he knows us and we know him is ridiculous. Yeah. You don't get to say to us, you don't know us, you don't know me. I know the people that you're with very well. Right. And so y'all need to.
So this is Jason Rollo preaching in a North Carolina tent where Virginia Brethren helped. That is you and Jason Rollo shaking hands in Portland, Texas. It wasn't a fringe group. What created this aspect? Because the evangelism didn't leave, right? The evangelism is still a part of it. It's the issue of, you said to everybody in 2015, y'all got me connected to a bunch of folk. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And then they all just said, well, we're not tightening up. And that is what.
No, they did tighten up.
Well, let
Yeah,
me say,
report.
the statement was, we're not going to be able to get anybody to come.
Oh, that's HD. Yeah, the next year he said none of my friends will come. Jerry Moffitt said, get new friends.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then there's Jerry Moffitt. And so that's in Portland. Everybody had the recognition that it's evangelism, debates, right? Getting debates. And then when it turned into a fellowship discussion, which they all were very, very accustomed to from the 80s and the 90s, they just didn't want to do it. And we've just gotten way too big. Like, someone says, how? Y'all say the church? That's not what I mean. I'm saying everybody's got their tentacles to everything else. There is no autonomy. Everybody's got to, let me see what so-and-so's doing.
And Portland was a very wealthy congregation, so all these people would come in to try to get a drink, get some of the funds. And it's like, at some point somebody's got to say something. And I really appreciate the way they responded to the 2015 lectureship. I mean, they put up, right on the bulletin board, we're not having anything to do with these schools of preaching. Bear Valley. Yeah. And so.
And I don't,
they pulled their funds from Southwest also.
And I remember while we were there, actually, Jason Rollo wrote you a check.
Yeah.
And he said, I appreciate what you do up there.
Yeah.
So I don't want it to be, like I've said, to their credit, God bless them.
Yeah.
We've got good relationships. I just wish that we could get back to it. And the idea is someone's like, get back to it. The evangelism, the disciple making. No one's saying anything about lectureships. I'm fine if lectureships die. I mean, if y'all want to get to where you start actually covering something and we motivate towards something, that's a different story. And I also wanted to say, too, to the Portland people, Micah gets his charges with the trespassing from Westover Baptist, and what Portland does what?
Portland basically paid the majority of our lawyer. And so
on top of supporting
the work. Yeah.
God bless them.
Yeah.
Nobody's taking any of that away.
And so if people are trying to figure out why are y'all doing this? The reason we're doing this segment like at the end is have a look at what we're talking about and what's going on in the since 1999 to this point as far as evangelism and these guys right here. Do you think we're quitting? I mean, do you think that Jason Rollo and Terrence Dindy's pushback is going to change anything? B.J. Clark? We didn't mention that B.J. Clark was actually at South Haven when I was already in the Pacific and I was being funded by South Haven before he ever got there. This guy knows me, and he knows that I came out of the Pacific, re-raised my funds, and went back. Do you think the little tiny blackballing me from the Memphis School of Preaching is going to change anything? Absolutely not. We are not in any way fixing to let up. That's the get to know us. This is just the beginning of it, and we have a huge platform. The support that we have is not connected, and it doesn't matter if it's connected. We've dropped our support how many times? I've heard you on the phone tell somebody that's supporting you $1,000 a month, and they challenge you. You say, keep your money. I told him that you said that, and he said, I don't believe it. So then you call him up and say,
again, a three-way call.
Keep your money. And so the Lord is in charge of the money. And, I just had a show where I actually mentioned about losing funds. If I do this, within 24 hours, I got a call from an 82-year-old man in Texas.
Right.
I'm picking that up and got the check day before yesterday.
If you support the work, it's because you see the value and you appreciate the work, but you don't get to start coaching me when you don't have experience. And that's why I said to that man, love him and appreciate him too, but you're just not going to coach.
Yeah.
You don't do what I do.
And the reason we're saying all of this too is we believe that by doing this, we get to be back with you.
Yeah.
We mentioned the gentleman that apologized to me after being involved with Garland Elkins and Curtis Cates, and Curtis Cates basically blackballing me from that point. And this particular gentleman that said he was sorry 6, 7, 8 years later, he's the one that precipitated that whole thing, the three-way call where they got on with me. Mm-hmm. And then he realizes, you're not a liberal. These guys, and he, ended up not being in fellowship with Curtis Cates himself. Yeah. So,
one more, I just, look, this is all just to say, no ill will, all love. I do want to close out with this. This is a book, another one that no one has read. And so, this is James Bales. And here we are, if y'all didn't know, one of the things that I say to Rubel Shelly is here we are 40 years later. From the 1984 open forum, where 40 years later, you write your book, 40 years later. Some of y'all are going to, if you pick up Contending for the Faith, you're going to see the stuff they said about Carl Ketcherside and Leroy Garrett, and they all were trying to pin Carl Ketcherside, Leroy Garrett to Rubel Shelly. People were saying things like it's Rubel's mouth, but it's the pen of Carl Ketcherside. I have to say, you guys don't know what you're talking about, Leroy Garrett and Carl Ketcherside either. But someone looks at Rubel and they say, well, we were right. he did move closer towards Leroy Garrett and Carl Ketcher's side, and I asked him that, and he just said, well, I don't know. I know, and he did. But on the flip side, someone's going to have to read Shall We Splinter by James Bales and say, James Bales was right. James Bale put a compilation together, people's positions on marriage and divorce, and he essentially said, why y'all beating up on me when y'all gave all these people a pass? And he predicted, he said, if y'all keep this up, you're going to divide. So y'all basically look across the aisle and say, Rubel Shelly, big old liberal, look where he turned out 40 years later. Well, Rubel Shelly looks across back at the aisle and says, look where y'all end up 40 years later. Exactly where they said you'd be.
And they could have him on the lectureship at Freed Hardeman now.
Yeah.
So
just that is an on 40-year
yeah.
slant. So we conclude this. Yeah, you say this was on its own, but all this was designed to give you some context to the interview, some discussion points about the interview, why we wanted to do it, what we hope to accomplish with it, but then also to make just an appeal back to brethren. We still love y'all. That never changed.
And the amount of time that we spent, is it really that time?
Is it really 11:40?
Yes, sir. Okay. Well, Brant and Rick, can I say to y'all, if you get to see this, we stayed on that television program that we're showing with you guys on What Does the Bible Say? We started at 9 o'clock and we were still there at midnight. Yeah. And then we call it the Crazy Saturday Night. If anybody wants to hear it, they end up having to call the police. People were talking about burning our tent down. You were at the tent. Jason Harrison's friend had to come out there and rescue y'all. Caleb's friends were calling him saying they're talking about y'all on television. Nick Clark.
We were probably 10, and he was calling me saying, y'all okay?
And so that was the Pentecostals here, the Apostolics talking about burning our tent down. They came and caused the police to have to come to the studio because they were hanging out in the weeds and whatever, going to try to catch us when we left. And Rick and Steve, they were there that whole time. And so what's a little 3-hour journey for the cause of Christ?
And so a lot of, for me, like I say, my childhood, and all y'all were giving help to my dad, so I have to appreciate that, and he does too. And I just wish that it was about disciple making. So thank y'all for being with us tonight. The interview series is called Candid Christians, and someone might say, well, who's next? Well, I did see other people on the road besides Rubel Shelly. And so I had a very good visit with David Hill. That's him on top at the Tennessee Bible College. I told him exactly what I was trying to do. I said, this all revolves around the last 30, 40 years. I said, do you think you can do that? He said, absolutely. 30, 40 years, and a lot can get done in what the Bible calls one generation. You see that down there? That's me. That's my baby. And that's the back of another man's head. And somebody says, who's that? That's someone else who has agreed to interview for Candid Christian. And he has a very interesting story. And he was a young man. And that's when his story happened. We love y'all. Thank you for being a part of all these Bible studies and all the encouragement and support that you've given over the years. We're just trying to make these stands based on principle and conviction, and we hope that everybody else is doing the same. We have the interview tomorrow night at 8 p.m.
Excellent.
Y'all keep asking, what does the Bible say? God bless you.